In today's video, we're breaking down real cases where police officers save children from unthinkable situations. This is When Cops Save Kids from Atrocities, a true crime compilation. Let's get started. First up, we got the abduction and rescue of Elizabeth Smart, 2002-03, Utah, USA. The abduction and rescue of Elizabeth Smart, 2002-03, Utah, USA. Elizabeth Smart was 14 years old when a man broke into her family home in Salt Lake City, Utah, on June 5, 2002. What happened to her over the next 9 months became one of the most closely watched missing person cases in American history. The way police eventually found her and brought her home safe showed how important it was for officers to act quickly when people called in tips, and how one family never stopped fighting to bring their daughter back. The Smart family lived in a comfortable neighborhood called Federal Heights in Salt Lake City. Ed and Lois Smart had 6 children, and Elizabeth was their second oldest. They were an active Mormon family, deeply involved in their church community. Elizabeth was a bright student at Bryant Middle School who played the harp and was looking forward to graduating from middle school. She shared a bedroom with her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine. The family seemed like they had everything going for them. They were in the middle of renovating their home to sell it, which meant different workers and contractors came through the house regularly. Nobody thought twice about the various people who showed up to do odd jobs. About 7 months before Elizabeth disappeared, something happened that would later become incredibly important. Lois Smart was downtown in Salt Lake City when she ran into a man panhandling on the street. He was asking for money and looked down on his luck. The man called himself Emmanuel. Lois gave him $5 and offered him work if he needed it. She told him he could come to their house and do some yard work and roof repairs to earn more money. The man agreed and showed up at their home in November 2001. He worked for about 5 hours, raking leaves and doing minor repairs on the roof. Elizabeth was there that day and saw him briefly, but he looked completely normal at the time. He was clean-shaven with short hair and regular clothes. He took his money and left, and the family thought nothing more of it. On June 4, 2002, the Smart family went to an awards ceremony at Bryant Middle School. Elizabeth received awards for physical fitness and academics. The family came home late that night, and everyone went to bed. Elizabeth and Mary Catherine were in their shared bedroom on the 2nd floor. The house was quiet and peaceful. Nobody knew that in just a few hours, everything would change forever. Around 1 in the morning, on June 5th, Elizabeth woke up to something cold and sharp pressed against her throat. A man was standing over her bed holding a knife. He told her to be quiet and get up, or he would kill her and her entire family. Mary Catherine woke up too when she heard the man's voice, but she was so terrified that she pretended to stay asleep. She watched through barely opened eyes as the man forced Elizabeth out of bed. Elizabeth was wearing her red silk pajamas. The man made her put on a pair of shoes and marched her out of the bedroom. Mary Catherine saw them walk down the hallway past her brother's room. She was absolutely terrified that if she moved or made a sound, the man would come back for her too. Mary Catherine stayed frozen in her bed for what felt like forever. She waited about 2 hours before she finally found the courage to get up and run to her parents' room. She woke up her mom and dad and told them a man had taken Elizabeth. At first, Ed and Lois thought their youngest daughter had just had a bad dream. But when they went to check Elizabeth's room and found her bed empty, panic set in immediately. They searched the whole house and found a kitchen window with the screen cut open. The man had sliced through it with a knife to get inside. That was when they knew Mary Catherine was telling the truth. They called 911 right away. Within an hour, police officers flooded the Smart home. Search dogs were brought in, and they managed to track Elizabeth's scent from the house up into the foothills behind the neighborhood, but the trail went cold after just a short distance. By morning, the news was everywhere. A 14-year-old girl had been kidnapped from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. The community was shocked and terrified. If this could happen to the Smart family in their nice neighborhood, it could happen to anyone. Ed and Lois Smart went on television the very next day to plead for whoever took their daughter to bring her back. They set up a reward fund that quickly grew to $250,000. The Laura Recovery Center organized massive search efforts with up to 2,000 volunteers showing up every single day to look for Elizabeth. People on foot, on horseback, in cars, and even in planes and helicopters searched the mountains and valleys around Salt Lake City. The Smart family created a website about Elizabeth's disappearance and released home videos of her playing the harp and spending time with her family. They did everything they could to keep her face in the news. What nobody knew at the time was that Elizabeth was actually very close by. The man who took her was Brian David Mitchell, the same person who had worked on their roof 7 months earlier, calling himself Emmanuel. He had grown a long beard and let his hair grow out since then, which made him look completely different. Mitchell walked Elizabeth 4 miles up into the mountains behind her house while she was still in her pajamas and the shoes she had grabbed. He took her to a crude campsite in an area called Dry Creek Canyon, only about 3 miles from the Smart family home. It was so close that Elizabeth could actually hear the voices of searchers calling her name in the days after she was taken. When they got to the camp, Mitchell's wife, Wanda Barzee, was waiting for them. Barzee washed Elizabeth's feet in a basin and gave her white robes to wear instead of her pajamas. Mitchell performed what he called a marriage ceremony, claiming that God had told him to take Elizabeth as his second wife. He said he was a prophet with his own religious sect, and that Elizabeth should feel blessed this was happening to her. She should be grateful, he told her. Then Mitchell raped her. He raped her again and again, sometimes multiple times every single day for the next 9 months. Mitchell kept Elizabeth chained to trees like an animal. He used metal wire cables to tether her so she couldn't escape. He threatened her constantly, telling her that if she tried to run away or call for help, he would find her family and kill them. He told her that her family had already given up looking for her and moved on with their lives. He forced her to drink alcohol even though she had never drunk before. He made her look at pornography. He starved her and sometimes made her eat garbage. When she got sick, she had to sleep in her own vomit because they wouldn't help her. Barzee treated Elizabeth like a slave, making her do all the chores around the camp while also being jealous that Mitchell was paying so much attention to his new young wife instead of her. The whole time this nightmare was happening, police were investigating back in Salt Lake City. They had received a description from Mary Catherine about the kidnapper, but her details were limited and sometimes inaccurate because she had been so scared and it had been dark. She said the man was white, about 5'8", between 30 and 40 years old, wearing light-colored clothes and a golf hat. In reality, Mitchell had been wearing all black, had no golf hat, and was actually 48 years old. Mary Catherine had never gotten a good look at his face, which made creating a police sketch extremely difficult. The investigation initially focused on a man named Richard Ricci. He was a handyman with a long criminal record who had also worked at the Smart home. Police thought he was involved somehow. Ricci was already in jail on a parole violation, and investigators questioned him repeatedly. He denied having anything to do with Elizabeth's disappearance. Then, in August 2002, Ricci died in prison from a brain hemorrhage. Many people thought this meant the case would never be solved and that Elizabeth was probably dead, but the Smart family refused to give up hope. They kept Elizabeth's name in the news however they could. They held press conferences, did interviews, and constantly pushed for more search efforts. Meanwhile, after about 2 months at the mountain campsite, Mitchell decided it was time to move. He forced Elizabeth to wear a wig and dress in long white robes and a veil that covered her entire face. Only her eyes showed through. He started taking her into Salt Lake City in public. People walked right past them on the street and had no idea the veiled girl was Elizabeth Smart. Mitchell would panhandle and preach on street corners while Elizabeth stood there silently beside him, too terrified to call for help because of his threats to kill her family. One time, they were sitting in the downtown Salt Lake City library when a homicide detective approached them. The detective thought it was strange that this young girl was wearing a veil and asked Mitchell about it. Mitchell calmly explained that he and his wife were ministers and they were protecting their daughter for her eventual marriage. Barzee gripped Elizabeth's leg hard under the table as a warning not to speak. The detective accepted the explanation and walked away. Elizabeth was devastated. She had been so close to being rescued, but she was too scared to say anything because of Mitchell's constant threats. Mitchell grew paranoid after that library incident. He decided they needed to leave Utah entirely. In October 2002, he took Elizabeth and Barzee on a Greyhound bus all the way to San Diego, California. The bus ride was almost 14 hours long. Elizabeth felt like she was being sentenced to 20 more years of this nightmare. She thought she would never see her family again. In California, they set up a new camp near Lakeside, about an hour outside of San Diego. They lived in homeless camps and under bridges. Mitchell continued raping Elizabeth every single day. He even came up with a sex schedule after Barzee complained that he was lusting after Elizabeth too much. He would be with Barzee from noon to midday, and then he would rape Elizabeth from midday until the next morning. Mitchell kept talking about finding more young girls to kidnap so he could have 7 wives total. He even tried to kidnap Elizabeth's cousin while they were still in Utah, using the same green bag of tools he had used to take Elizabeth. He wore the same dark clothes and approached the cousin's house in the same way, but someone in the house snored and moved around, which scared him off. When he came back empty-handed, he told Elizabeth they weren't ready to receive another wife yet. He tried again in California, making friends with a family and seeing pictures of their teenage daughter. He planned to go back and take her, but that attempt also failed. Back in Utah, something important finally happened in October 2002. Mary Catherine suddenly had a memory breakthrough. She was lying in bed one night when something clicked in her mind. The voice of the man who took Elizabeth sounded familiar. She realized she had heard that voice before. She went to her parents and told them she thought the kidnapper might be Emmanuel, the homeless man who had worked on their house over a year ago. She remembered his voice from that day. The Smart family immediately told police about this lead, but investigators were skeptical. They thought it was strange that Mary Catherine would suddenly remember this detail 4 months after the kidnapping. Police had already focused so much energy on Richard Ricci, who was now dead, that they were reluctant to pursue this new direction. The Smart family grew frustrated with how police were handling the tip. They felt like the officers weren't taking Mary Catherine seriously. In February 2003, the family decided to take matters into their own hands. They held their own press conference and released a sketch of Emmanuel based on Mary Catherine's description. They went on the television show America's Most Wanted and shared the sketch with millions of viewers. They criticized police for not following up on the lead fast enough. Within days of the sketch being released, Mitchell's stepson saw it on television and immediately recognized his stepfather. He called police and told them that Emmanuel was actually his disturbed stepfather, Brian David Mitchell, and he absolutely believed Mitchell was capable of kidnapping a child. Police finally had a real name to work with. Mitchell had an arrest record, so they were able to get photos of him. America's Most Wanted aired an episode featuring these photos, alongside the Emmanuel sketch. Around the same time, Mitchell made the decision to return to Utah. Elizabeth had actually convinced him to go back by telling him she had received a revelation from God that they should return to Salt Lake City instead of moving to New York or Boston like he had planned. In reality, Elizabeth just desperately wanted to be closer to home, even if she was still captive. They hitchhiked back to Utah and arrived in early March 2003. They were back in the Salt Lake City area for only a couple hours when multiple people started recognizing them. On March 12, 2003, 2 different couples spotted Mitchell, Barzee, and the veiled girl walking down State Street in Sandy, Utah. Alvin and Anita Dickerson were running errands when Alvin noticed a homeless-looking man with 2 women. Something about the man's face looked familiar. When they drove past the group a second time, Alvin half-jokingly told his wife that the man looked like the street preacher from the America's Most Wanted episode about Elizabeth Smart. When Anita got out of the car at a Kinko's and walked within 20 feet of the group, she got what her husband later described as an electrified look on her face. She knew it was him. The couple immediately called police. Another couple, Nancy and Rudy Montoya, also recognized Mitchell and called in a tip. Sandy police officers responded within minutes. 4 officers approached the trio and started asking questions. Mitchell and Barzee gave fake names, and Elizabeth went along with it at first. She had been threatened for 9 straight months. Mitchell had told her over and over that he would kill her family if she didn't obey. Even though police were right there in front of her, she was still terrified. But the officers kept pressing. They separated the 3 of them and kept asking Elizabeth who she really was. Finally, one officer told her directly that there was a girl who had been missing for a very long time, and her family had never stopped searching for her and wanted her to come home more than anything in the world. Something in Elizabeth broke at that moment. She admitted she was Elizabeth Smart. The officers put Elizabeth in a separate patrol car and took all 3 of them to the Sandy police station. They called Ed Smart immediately and told him to get there as fast as possible. Chris Thomas, the crisis consultant the Smart family had hired to help keep Elizabeth's case in the news, got a call from Ed Smart telling him to come to the Sandy police station right away. Thomas was terrified they had found a body. He kept calling his friend who worked as a detective at Sandy Police until the detective finally answered and said yes. They had brought in an indigent teenager they believed was Elizabeth Smart. Thomas took a deep breath and asked where they found the body. His friend said, "What body?" "She's alive in the room next to me." Thomas burst into tears of relief. When Ed Smart arrived at the police station and walked in to see his daughter, he later said it was the most beautiful moment of his life. Elizabeth was finally home after 278 days. The news spread across Utah and then across the entire country within hours. People could barely believe it. After 9 months, Elizabeth Smart had been found alive. It was like a miracle. Thousands of people gathered at Liberty Park in Salt Lake City to celebrate. The entire state of Utah seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Mitchell and Barzee were immediately arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping, aggravated burglary, aggravated sexual assault, and attempted kidnapping of Elizabeth's cousin. But the legal process turned into a long and complicated battle. Defense attorneys argued that Mitchell was mentally ill and incompetent to stand trial. In July 2005, a judge ruled that both Mitchell and Barzee were unfit for trial and sent them to Utah State Hospital. Years went by with no trial. The case was eventually transferred to federal court, where they faced charges of interstate kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor across state lines for sexual activity. Barzee was eventually found competent to stand trial. In November 2009, she pleaded guilty to federal kidnapping charges as part of a plea deal. She apologized to Elizabeth in court, saying she was so sorry for all the pain and suffering she caused. In May 2010, a judge sentenced Barzee to 15 years in federal prison. She also got 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison for the attempted kidnapping of Elizabeth's cousin, with the sentences running at the same time. Mitchell continued disrupting court hearings by singing hymns loudly and refusing to cooperate. Finally, in March 2010, a federal judge ruled that Mitchell was competent to stand trial. The judge wrote a 149-page decision explaining that the evidence proved Mitchell had the capacity to assist his lawyers and behave appropriately in court. The trial began in November 2010, more than 8 years after Elizabeth was kidnapped. Elizabeth flew back from Paris, France, where she was serving a mission for her church, to testify at the trial. She took the stand for 3 full days. In calm, precise testimony, she described everything Mitchell had done to her. She explained how he raped her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, how he chained her to trees and kept her tethered with metal cables, how he forced her to drink alcohol and look at pornography, how he threatened to kill her family if she tried to escape, how he starved her and made her eat garbage. The courtroom sat in absolute silence as she spoke. Many of the jurors were crying. Elizabeth also described the time she almost got rescued but was too scared to speak up because of Mitchell's threats. She talked about hearing her uncle's voice calling her name when search parties came close to the mountain camp, but being unable to answer. She explained the library incident with the detective who just walked away. She described the moment in the back of the police car in Sandy when she finally admitted who she was, knowing the 9-month nightmare was finally over. The defense attorneys tried to argue that Mitchell was insane and sincerely believed God had commanded him to do these things. The prosecution argued that Mitchell was a manipulative predator who used religion as a tool to get what he wanted, which was to rape young girls. Prosecutors pointed out that Mitchell was extremely strategic and calculating. He had managed to evade capture for 9 months while taking Elizabeth out in public. He had successfully manipulated multiple people with his religious claims. He had consciously tried to kidnap additional girls. These were not the actions of someone who was genuinely insane. On December 10, 2010, the jury reached their verdict. They found Brian David Mitchell guilty on both counts of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor across state lines for sexual activity. As the verdict was read, Mitchell sang hymns loudly while his attorney tried to get him to be quiet. Elizabeth and her family were smiling. After the verdict, Elizabeth told reporters outside the courthouse that she hoped this case showed other victims that justice can be served in America and that people can move on after terrible things happen. She said she was thrilled with the outcome. In May 2011, Mitchell was sentenced to 2 life terms in federal prison with no possibility of parole. The case had a lasting impact far beyond just the Smart family. Elizabeth's kidnapping led to improvements in how police agencies work together on missing children cases. It showed the critical importance of following up quickly on tips from the public. Those 2 couples who called police when they recognized Mitchell on the street in Sandy literally saved Elizabeth's life. It also demonstrated how vital it is to keep missing children's cases in the media so the public stays aware and vigilant. Elizabeth Smart herself became a powerful advocate for missing persons and child safety. She founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation to help prevent crimes against children and provide education about protecting themselves. She speaks out strongly against abstinence-only sex education, explaining how that type of teaching made her feel worthless after she was raped, like she had lost all her value. She advocates for comprehensive education that teaches children they always have worth no matter what happens to them. She works with law enforcement on training programs. She has written books about her experience. She became a correspondent for crime shows to help highlight other missing persons cases. In September 2018, Wanda Barzee was released from prison after serving her sentence. Elizabeth spoke out against the parole board's decision to release her, saying everyone needs to remain vigilant about protecting families and communities from people who would seek to hurt or take advantage of others. But Elizabeth also made clear that she was not going to let Barzee's release consume her life. She was focused on her own happiness and her own family. Elizabeth got married to Matthew Gilmore in 2012. They have 3 children together. She graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in harp performance. She lives a full and happy life. She often says that the best advice she ever received came from her mother the morning after she was rescued. Her mom told her that what Mitchell did was terrible and evil, and he stole 9 months of her life that she would never get back. But the best punishment Elizabeth could give him was to be happy and move forward with her life and do exactly what she wanted to do. By feeling sorry for herself and holding on to what happened, she would only be giving him more power and control, and he didn't deserve another second. Elizabeth has followed that advice. She talks openly about her experience when it can help others, but she focuses on living her life fully. She takes her family skiing every weekend in the winter. She continues her advocacy work. She gives speeches at universities and conferences. She works with lawmakers on child protection legislation. On every anniversary of March 12th, she calls it nothing but a good day, nothing but a happy day. The day she was found in Sandy and got to go home. The rescue of Elizabeth Smart remains one of the most remarkable missing person cases in American history. It showed that even after 9 months, even when almost everyone thought she must be dead, there was still hope. It proved that ordinary citizens paying attention and calling in tips can make all the difference. It demonstrated that families who never give up and keep fighting to bring their loved ones home can sometimes get the miracle they're praying for. And it showed that survivors of unimaginable trauma can heal and go on to live beautiful, meaningful lives filled with purpose and joy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the 1993 kindergarten hostage situation in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. The 1993 kindergarten hostage situation in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. On the morning of May 13, 1993, a kindergarten classroom in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France became the center of a crisis that would hold the entire nation in suspense for 46 hours. What happened inside that room showed both the darkest actions of a desperate man and the incredible courage of a young teacher who kept 21 small children calm while facing down someone who called himself the human bomb. The way French police ultimately rescued those children became a textbook example of how to handle a hostage situation involving kids, even though controversy would follow about exactly how it ended. Neuilly-sur-Seine is an expensive suburb just outside Paris, the kind of place where diplomats and wealthy businessmen live in nice houses with their families. The Commandant Charcot School Complex sat on Rue de la Ferme, a quiet street where parents dropped off their young children every morning without a second thought about safety. On this particular Thursday morning, kindergarten class number 8 was full of 3- and 4-year-old children sitting at little tables, working on a craft project with their teacher. It was almost Mother's Day, and the kids were making necklaces out of salt dough to give to their moms. The teacher leading the class was Laurence Dreyfus. She was 30 years old and had only been teaching at this school since September 1992. This was still her first year as a teacher at Commandant Charcot. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would change. At exactly 9:27 in the morning, a man burst through the classroom door. He was dressed entirely in black. His head was hidden by a motorcycle helmet, and a balaclava mask covered his face. He carried bags slung over his shoulders and around his body. The children looked up from their craft project, probably confused about who this strange person was. The man held what looked like a gun in his hand. Wrapped around his waist and stomach were what appeared to be sticks of dynamite held together with tape and wires. He looked absolutely terrifying. The man did not speak at first. Instead, he pulled out sheets of paper that had been typed on a computer. He showed these papers to Laurence Dreyfus. The typed words explained that he was taking the class hostage. He demanded that she go get the school principal. Dreyfus had to somehow stay calm even though she was looking at a masked man with explosives strapped to his body standing in her classroom full of babies. She left the room to find the principal, a woman named Suzanne Soele. When the principal came to the classroom and saw what was happening, she immediately called the police as the man had instructed. The man's demands were written out in careful detail on his typed papers. He wanted 100 million francs, which was about $18 million. He wanted the money in used bills and gold bars. He wanted a large car to escape in. He signed all his papers and demands with the initials H.B. Nobody knew what those letters stood for yet. Police would not figure out the man's real identity until after everything was over. For now, they just knew him by the name he gave himself, Human Bomb. Word spread incredibly fast that a kindergarten class had been taken hostage. By 10:30 in the morning, news media from all over France started arriving at the school. Television cameras and reporters set up outside the building. Parents of children in other classes at the school rushed to pick up their kids after all the other classrooms were evacuated. But the parents of the 21 children in class number 8 had to stand outside and wait. not knowing if they would ever see their babies again. The entire nation was glued to their television sets, watching this drama unfold in real time. The elite tactical unit called RAID moved into position around the school at 10:45. RAID stands for Research, Assistance, Intervention, and Deterrence. They are the French equivalent of American SWAT teams, specially trained to handle dangerous situations exactly like this one. The RAID commander was a man named Louis Bayon. He had a negotiator with him named Michel Marie. They needed to figure out who this human bomb person was and what he really wanted. More importantly, they needed to keep those children alive. Police immediately started negotiating with the masked man. The director of the Hauts-de-Seine police force, a man named Aimé Tuitu, began talking to the hostage-taker. The man gave Dreyfus a letter to pass along that was addressed to the Minister of the Interior. In this letter, he repeated his demands for the huge ransom and the getaway car. He threatened to blow up the entire classroom if his demands were not met. The threat was absolutely credible because just a few days earlier, on May 9th, someone using the initials HB had set off a bomb in an underground parking lot in Neuilly. That explosion had only caused property damage, but it proved this person knew how to make real bombs that actually worked. The bomber had left a pamphlet at that parking lot attack demanding the resignation of the president and the Minister of the Interior. As negotiations continued through the morning, the RAID team came up with a strategy. Commander Bayon and negotiator Marie convinced two fathers whose children were in the classroom to help negotiate with HB. The hope was that speaking to parents might make the hostage-taker more sympathetic. By early afternoon, this approach started working. The man released 5 children. This was an enormous relief. 5 little kids got to go home to their families. But 16 children and their teacher were still trapped inside with the human bomb. At 3 in the afternoon, Nicolas Sarkozy showed up. Sarkozy was the mayor of Neuilly-sur-Seine. He also happened to be the budget minister for France and a government spokesman. He was a rising political figure who saw an opportunity to get involved in this national crisis happening in his own city. Sarkozy took over the negotiations personally. He asked the human bomb to deal with him directly instead of the other negotiators. Sarkozy entered the classroom 7 separate times over the course of the day to talk face-to-face with the masked man. During one of these visits, he brought out a child in his arms and handed the little boy to his mother in front of all the television cameras. The footage of Sarkozy carrying that child out of the school played on every news channel in France. Altogether, Sarkozy managed to get 4 children released through his negotiations. Later, it would come out that Sarkozy had specifically asked to be filmed by the cameras. He brought a press officer with him who had a camera to document his heroic actions. This would eventually become controversial, but at the time, people just saw a government official trying to save children. The human bomb made additional demands as the day wore on. In exchange for releasing more children, he wanted a radio and a television set brought into the classroom. Police agreed and gave him what he asked for. This meant the hostage-taker could now watch and listen to news coverage of his own crime in real time. He could see himself on television. He demanded to speak with a journalist from TF1, which was a major French television channel. A reporter named Jean-Pierre About was brought to the classroom to meet with the man. About later told other reporters that the scene inside was surrealistic. The children were playing games. The teacher was keeping them busy. The masked man seemed extraordinarily calm for someone in the middle of a hostage situation. Throughout that first day, the man released children in small groups. By nightfall on Thursday, he had freed 15 of the original 21 children. That meant 6 little girls remained as hostages, along with Lawrence Dreyfus. The man ordered sandwiches and blankets brought in so the children and teacher would be comfortable for the night. He asked for numerous cups of coffee to help him stay awake. Around 4 in the morning on Friday, he told police to leave him alone for the rest of the night. But he didn't actually sleep. He stayed awake all through Thursday night into Friday morning. All this time, Dreyfus was doing something absolutely remarkable. She was keeping the 6 remaining children completely calm. These were 3- and 4-year-old kids who should have been terrified out of their minds. But Dreyfus made up a story to explain the masked man with the gun. She told the children that he was a wolf hunter who had come to visit them. She said he was wearing all that strange equipment because he hunted wolves. The children believed her. They thought this was some kind of game or special visitor to their classroom. Dreyfus kept them singing songs and playing quiet games. She told them stories. She made sure they ate their meals and slept through the night on blankets on the classroom floor. The man never removed his motorcycle helmet or mask the entire time, so the children never saw his face. To them, he was just the strange wolf hunter lady who their teacher said was there to see them. Dreyfus was technically not a hostage herself. The man allowed her to leave the room when necessary. She could go out to get food for the children or to use the bathroom. She could have walked away from the situation entirely, but she made the choice to stay with her students. She refused to abandon the 6 little girls who were still trapped. Police asked her to help them without the hostage taker knowing. When video equipment was brought in as one of the man's demands, police asked Dreyfus to secretly point a camera at him so they could watch his movements. She did exactly that, giving Raid crucial information about what was happening inside the room. The crisis continued all through Friday. The man seemed to be losing focus on his original demand for money. Negotiators became very worried when he started talking about suicide. He told police that he would prefer to die rather than be taken alive. He said he would use the children as human shields if police tried to take him by force. This was everyone's worst nightmare scenario. The man had already proven he could build real bombs. He had 21 sticks of dynamite spread around the classroom and wrapped around his body. If he wanted to blow himself up and take those little girls and their teacher with him, he absolutely could. A white van arrived at the school on Friday afternoon. Inside was money from the Bank of France. The man had been very specific about what he wanted. He demanded bills in denominations of 20, 100, 200, and 500 francs. He even specified exactly how many bills of each type he wanted. Police were trying to meet his demands, hoping this might convince him to release the rest of the children, but he did not take the money and walk away. Instead, he just kept the children there with him. By Friday afternoon, Dreyfus finally left the classroom. She had been with those children for more than 24 hours straight. A military doctor named Eveline Lambert was allowed to stay with the children and the hostage taker for a while to check on everyone's health. Lambert was incredibly brave to volunteer to be in that room with a man strapped with explosives. President François Mitterrand, who was on an official visit to Greece at the time, was being updated every hour about the situation. Prime Minister Edouard Balladur met with Interior Minister Charles Pasqua late Thursday night to discuss options. The entire French government was focused on this one classroom in Neuilly. As the crisis entered its 36th hour, specialists started talking to the media about how long a person could stay awake. A neurologist named Dr. Jean Krieger told reporters that a motivated person could hold out for 36 to 48 hours without sleep. But after that, exhaustion would set in. The human bomb had been drinking coffee constantly to stay alert, but by early Saturday morning, after being awake for nearly 48 hours straight, his body was starting to give out. Raid had been watching the man through their hidden camera. Around 7 in the morning on Saturday, May 15th, they saw him start to nod off. His head drooped forward. He was finally falling asleep. This was the moment Raid had been waiting for. Commander Bayon made the decision to move immediately. The plan was to enter the classroom while the man was unconscious, evacuate the children as quickly as possible, and neutralize the threat before he could wake up and detonate his explosives. At exactly 7:25 on Saturday morning, Raid officers entered the classroom. They wore masks and moved silently. Dr. Lambert was already in the room with the 6 children and the sleeping hostage taker. Before the tactical team came in, Lambert had deliberately made a terrible racket by moving furniture around. She shook the man hard and told him to wake up. She was trying to verify that he was actually deeply asleep and would not wake easily from noise. Once she confirmed he was truly unconscious, she signaled that Raid could enter. The officers moved to where the children were. They quickly covered the 6 little girls with mattresses to shield them from what was about to happen and to block their view so they would not see violence. 2 raid officers took positions watching the sleeping man. Their job was to neutralize him immediately if he woke up. Another team started moving the children out of the room one by one. But then something went wrong. One of the children got scared when she saw the masked raid officers come into the room. She screamed. The scream woke up the human bomb. He jerked awake, and his hand moved toward the detonator device on his belt. The raid officers watching him had a split second to make a decision. If they hesitated and he managed to trigger the explosives, everyone in that room would die. A police officer named Daniel Boulanger fired his weapon. He aimed for the head because shooting the body could set off the explosives strapped around the man's waist. The first bullet was enough to neutralize the threat. But following standard tactical procedures for high-danger situations, Boulanger fired 2 more shots in rapid succession. This is called a double tap and is a technique used by elite intervention units to make absolutely certain a dangerous target is down. 3 bullets to the head killed the human bomb instantly at 7:28 in the morning. Within minutes, all 6 children were safely out of the classroom and reunited with their parents. Doctors checked them over and found they were all in perfect health. The children seemed remarkably unbothered by the whole 46-hour ordeal. 30 seconds after being freed, they were playing again as if nothing unusual had happened. This was entirely thanks to Lawrence Dreyfus and her incredible ability to keep them calm through the entire nightmare. Interior Minister Charles Pasqua held a press conference right outside the school. "The nightmare is over," he announced. "The hostage taker is dead. At the beginning, there were 21 children, and today there are still 21 children alive. All of them are in good health." Pasqua praised Dreyfus repeatedly for playing such a crucial role under extremely difficult conditions. "The madman is dead," he said. "The law remained in force. The children were safe. France could finally breathe again." Only after the man was dead did police find his identification in his clothing and finally learn who he was. His name was Eric Schmidt. A few hours before he died, he had told Dreyfus what HB stood for. Human bomb. That was the name he had chosen for himself. Eric Schmidt was born on July 31, 1951 in Bordeaux, which was in French Algeria at the time. His father was a non-commissioned officer in the French army. When Algeria gained independence and French settlers fled the country, the Schmidt family moved to Serres near Béziers in southern France in 1963. Eric was only 12 years old when his family left Algeria. At age 16, he joined the French army just like his father. During his military service, he learned how to handle weapons and explosives. He became a sergeant and served until 1974 when he left the army. That same year, he got divorced from a wife that nobody in his hometown had ever met. The couple had no children. After leaving the military, Schmidt became a businessman. He created a computer services company in the Languedoc-Roussillon region. For a while, things seemed to go okay for him. But in 1991, his business went bankrupt. Schmidt lost everything. About 18 months before the hostage crisis, he was laid off from his job at an electrical company. He had no criminal record except for 2 minor offenses for speeding and drunk driving. Friends and former schoolmates who were interviewed after his death said they could not believe he had done something like this. They described him as having serious money problems after his business failed. One childhood friend told the newspaper Midi Libre that he believed Schmidt simply wanted to kill himself but could not find the courage to do it alone. The raid negotiator Michel Marie saw the hostage taking the same way. He thought it was the desperate act of a man at the end of his rope who wanted fame and a way to accomplish suicide by proxy. He wanted police to kill him because he couldn't do it himself. The way Schmidt planned his attack showed he was organized and intelligent despite his depression. Police described him as dangerous, determined, and remarkably calm throughout the ordeal. He had carefully thought through every stage of his operation and written it all down in well-written documents. His typed papers specifically said, "This is a hostage situation. Avoid a tragedy." He gave detailed instructions for different stages of what he expected to happen. He calculated exactly how much money he wanted and in what denominations. He even specified that 3 cars should be made available for his escape. 1 for himself, 1 police car to protect him, and a 3rd car for the news media. Everything was meticulously planned out. Lawrence Dreyfus became a national hero overnight. The media called her the Institutrice Courage, which translates to the courageous teacher. Charles Pasqua announced that she and Dr. Lambert would both receive the Legion of Honor, which is France's highest civilian award for bravery. President Mitterrand himself presented the medals to them. Prime Minister Balladur invited Dreyfus to his office at Matignon. In a later interview with Paris Match magazine, Dreyfus said she found it hard to come to terms with all the praise people heaped on her. She had just been doing what any teacher would do for their students. But the entire country saw her differently. She had kept 6 babies alive through sheer courage and cleverness for 46 hours. The experience changed Dreyfus's life forever. Shortly after the hostage crisis ended, she left the education field. She went back to school to study psychology. When asked why, she said she wanted to understand madness. She wanted to comprehend how someone could do what Schmidt had done. She eventually became a psychologist, using what she had learned from that terrible experience to help other people. But controversy erupted almost immediately about how Schmidt died. His family filed a complaint in July 1993 for premeditated homicide. They insisted that Eric had been killed in his sleep, not while awake and reaching for a detonator. Dr. Lambert had verified in her testimony that she made a terrible racket moving furniture and shook Schmidt hard, trying to wake him before raid entered. The only witnesses to Schmidt actually waking up were the 2 raid officers who were watching him. Nobody else saw it happen. This led to theories that police had executed him while he slept because they wanted him dead rather than arrested. A book came out in 1993 called La Mort hors la loi d'Eric Schmidt, which means The Unlawful Death of Eric Schmidt. The authors were 2 members of a left-leaning judicial union called Syndicat de la Magistrature. They argued that Schmidt's killing was a premeditated political execution. They claimed that Interior Minister Charles Pasqua had given orders to kill the hostage-taker rather than capture him alive. Pasqua filed a defamation lawsuit and won. The book was pulled from the market. 6 magistrates who wrote an article along the same lines for a magazine called Justice were also convicted of defamation against Pasqua. After a full investigation, an examining magistrate dismissed the homicide complaint from Schmidt's family. The magistrate ruled that the police officers had acted in legitimate self-defense. The investigation showed that while Schmidt had 21 sticks of dynamite spread around the classroom and wrapped around his body, the detonator was not actually primed. The bomb could not have gone off even if Schmidt had pushed the button, but the raid officers had no way of knowing that in the moment when they saw him wake up and reach for it. Years later, Nicolas Sarkozy's role in the crisis became controversial when he rose to become president of France. In 2004, several people who had been involved in the crisis were interviewed on a French television program. Journalist Jean-Pierre About, former prosecutor Pierre-Léon Cain, and former police director Aimé Tuitu all claimed that Sarkozy had imposed himself on the crisis management team and the media. Léon Cain said Sarkozy showed he was a political animal by bringing his own press officer with a camera to document his involvement. Critics argued that Sarkozy had put himself in front of cameras for political gain rather than purely to help the children. Some claimed his interference with negotiations may have actually prolonged the crisis or made it worse. But others pointed out that Sarkozy did successfully negotiate the release of 4 children, and all 6 remaining children came home alive in the end. The Noailles kindergarten hostage crisis marked the first time in French history that children had been taken hostage at a school. The nation watched in horror for 46 hours, wondering if those little kids would survive. The fact that RAID managed to rescue all 6 remaining children without a single injury to any child was seen as a tremendous success. The professionalism of the tactical team, the bravery of Lawrence Dreyfus and Dr. Lambert, and the patience of the negotiators all contributed to the best possible outcome in a terrible situation. In September 1993, just a few months after the crisis, Sarkozy's involvement earned him a spot in the prestigious Soleil Figaro magazine popularity poll. His national profile skyrocketed. He had been an up-and-coming politician before, but after Noailles, everyone in France knew his name. He would eventually become president of France in 2007, serving until 2012. The Noailles crisis remained a defining moment in his political career, even though questions persisted about whether his role had been helpful or self-serving. The 6 children who were freed that Saturday morning in May 1993 went home to their families and got to grow up safe. They were 3 and 4 years old when it happened, young enough that they probably don't have clear memories of the experience. What they might remember is making necklaces for Mother's Day and maybe a strange person their teacher said was hunting wolves. They would not remember the terror or the danger because Lawrence Dreyfus made absolutely sure they never felt afraid. That was perhaps the most incredible thing about the whole situation. A teacher protected her students, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. She made a nightmare feel like a normal day at school. She gave those children the gift of not being traumatized by something that easily could have destroyed their sense of safety forever. The hostage crisis remains an important case study for law enforcement agencies around the world about how to handle situations involving children. The emphasis on patience, the willingness to meet demands to buy time, the use of hidden surveillance to plan a rescue, and the decision to wait for the perfect moment to strike all proved to be the right approach. The fact that RAID had the courage to act decisively when that moment came saved 6 lives that morning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Operation Soteria Shield, April 2025, Texas, USA. Operation Soteria Shield, April 2025, Texas, USA. In April 2025, law enforcement agencies across Texas came together for one of the largest coordinated efforts in state history to rescue children from online sexual exploitation. Operation Soteria Shield was a month-long operation that brought more than 70 agencies together with a single mission: find the children being abused, arrest the people hurting them, and gather evidence to make sure these predators never got the chance to harm another kid again. What police discovered over those 30 days shocked even the most experienced investigators who had spent years working child exploitation cases. The operation saved 109 children and arrested 244 people. But behind those numbers was something even more disturbing. Many of the rescued children had never been reported missing. Their families had no idea the abuse was happening. The predators had found ways to exploit kids without ever physically taking them from their homes. The operation was led by the FBI Dallas Division, working together with the North Texas Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. The Dallas Police Department served as the lead agency for the task force. They were joined by police departments from Plano, Wiley, and Garland. But the operation reached far beyond North Texas. More than 70 different law enforcement agencies from all across Texas participated. This included police departments from cities like Abilene, Allen, Alvarado, Amarillo, Arlington, Fort Worth, Frisco, McKinney, San Antonio, Lubbock, and dozens of others. Sheriff's offices from Collin County, Denton County, Tarrant County, Gregg County, Hopkins County, Harrison County, and many more sent their officers to help. Federal agencies including Homeland Security Investigations and the Army Criminal Investigative Division joined the effort. The U.S. Attorneys' offices for both the eastern and northern districts of Texas worked on the legal side to make sure cases would hold up in court. Children's advocacy centers provided support for the victims. And critically, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children provided intelligence and case coordination that proved essential to the success of the entire operation. The name Soteria Shield came from the ancient Greek word soteria, which means salvation or deliverance. The name was chosen deliberately. This operation was about delivering children from exploitation and bringing them to safety. The shield part represented protection. Law enforcement was putting up a shield between vulnerable children and the predators who wanted to hurt them. Planning for an operation this size took months of preparation. The North Texas Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force had been working for 10 years, building relationships between different agencies and developing expertise in investigating online crimes against kids. What started as a small team with a bold idea had grown into something powerful. Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis explained that the collaborative effort had been built up over a decade. By April 2025, they had the structure in place to coordinate something as massive as Operation Soteria Shield. The investigators working these cases were highly skilled computer crime specialists. They understood how predators operated online. They knew the platforms and apps that abusers used to find and groom victims. They were familiar with the encrypted communication methods criminals thought would keep them safe, and they had the forensic tools needed to trace digital evidence and identify both victims and offenders. One key investigator was Detective Rich from the Plano Police Department. He was a member of the FBI Dallas Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force and was known nationally and internationally for his work on computer-facilitated crimes against children. Rich helped coordinate the efforts of skilled investigators who worked around the clock throughout April. The operation also had an unusual helper. A detection dog named Remy was specially trained to sniff out electronic storage devices. Remy could find hidden cell phones, tablets, hard drives, USB drives, and SD cards that suspects tried to hide during searches. This was incredibly valuable because predators often tried to conceal the devices containing evidence of their crimes. Remy's nose could find electronics hidden in walls, buried in yards, or stashed in vehicles. An organization called Our Rescue supported Remy and other electronic storage detection dogs working with ICAC units across the country. Throughout the month of April, investigators executed more than 140 search warrants at homes across 21 different Texas counties. Each warrant represented hours of investigative work beforehand to build probable cause and convince a judge that evidence of crimes would be found at that location. When officers arrived at these residences to execute the warrants, they often walked into unknown situations. They did not always know what they would find or if children were currently being abused inside. Some scenes were worse than others, but every single one involved evidence of children being exploited and victimized. The types of crimes investigators found varied. Some offenders were producing child sexual abuse material, which meant they were actively abusing children and recording it. These were often the cases where children were rescued from ongoing abuse. Other offenders were distributing child sexual abuse material. They were sharing images and videos through online networks, trading files with other predators, and spreading the exploitation of children all over the internet. Still, others were in possession of massive collections of child abuse material they had downloaded and stored on their devices. In many cases, the same offender was doing all three: producing, distributing, and possessing this horrific content. One particularly disturbing method that investigators encountered was online coercion. Plano Police Department Assistant Chief Dan Curtis explained that in many cases, the sex offenders never actually met their victims face-to-face. Instead, they used technology to manipulate and coerce children into sending them explicit images and videos. A predator would start by striking up an online conversation with a child through social media, gaming platforms, messaging apps, or other digital spaces where kids gathered. They would build trust over time, a process called grooming. Once they had established what seemed like a friendship or even a romantic relationship, they would start asking for sexual photos or videos. Sometimes they would threaten to share existing photos if the child did not send more. Other times they would pretend to be someone the child knew or threaten to hurt the child's family. The children felt trapped and scared. Many of them never told their parents what was happening. This explained one of the most shocking findings from Operation Soteria Shield. Assistant Chief Curtis revealed that many of the children who were recognized or rescued during the operation had been completely unknown to authorities before. They had never been reported missing. They had never told anyone about the abuse they were suffering. Their exploitation had been happening in secret. These kids were living at home, going to school, and appearing normal on the outside while being victimized online. The predators had found a way to abuse them without ever physically abducting them. This made the crimes incredibly difficult to detect unless investigators were actively monitoring online activity and tracing the distribution of illegal material. The investigative techniques used during Operation Soteria Shield included undercover operations. Some police officers posed as children online to identify predators who were actively trying to find victims. One example involved a man named Ryan Jacks, who was 34 years old and from Troop, Texas. Jacks began communicating online with someone he believed was a 14-year-old girl. In reality, he was talking to an undercover agent from the Collin County Sheriff's Office. Jacks sent sexually explicit messages to who he thought was a child. He continued the conversation via text message. Then he expressed his desire to meet this supposed child in person just a few days later. When Jacks showed up for what he thought would be a meeting with a 14-year-old girl, he was instead met by law enforcement officers who arrested him. This was exactly the kind of predatory behavior Operation Soteria Shield was designed to catch and stop. Investigators also worked closely with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. NCMEC analysts provided vital intelligence throughout the operation. When child sexual abuse material is discovered online, it often gets reported to NCMEC. Their analysts work to identify victims from images and videos. They track the distribution of this material across platforms and borders. They provide leads to law enforcement agencies about where crimes are being committed and who might be involved. During Operation Soteria Shield, NCMEC's case coordination was instrumental in connecting dots between different investigations and helping officers know where to focus their efforts. The amount of digital evidence seized during the operation was staggering. Investigators collected 1,130 electronic devices. These included cell phones, tablets, computers, external hard drives, USB flash drives, and SD cards. All of these devices had to be forensically analyzed to extract evidence. The total amount of data seized was 213 terabytes. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of more than 177,000 gigabytes of data. It would take an individual person multiple lifetimes to manually review all of that content. Fortunately, forensic analysts had specialized software tools that could help them search for and identify illegal material more efficiently. But even with those tools, the analysis process would take many months. Authorities expected that going through all the seized evidence would lead to additional arrests and the identification of even more victims who were not yet known. The 244 people arrested during Operation Soteria Shield came from all walks of life and all across Texas. Some were arrested in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. Others were arrested in cities like Lubbock in West Texas, Tyler and Longview in East Texas, and communities throughout the state. 21 of the people arrested were registered sex offenders, meaning they had already been convicted of sex crimes in the past and were supposed to be monitored. The fact that registered sex offenders were actively committing new crimes against children highlighted how persistent and determined these predators could be. Some specific cases that came out of the operation showed just how serious the crimes were. A man named Harold Lee Hill from Rockwall was charged with transporting a minor victim with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. Investigators said the FBI had been assisted by the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Rockwall Police Department, the Arkansas State Patrol, and the Dallas County Sheriff's Office in building the case against Hill. He was facing life in prison if convicted. In Fort Worth, police arrested a man named Michael Huffman. He was charged with distributing and possessing child pornography. The federal complaint stated that the images included an adult male engaging in sex acts with a female child. When federal agents went to Huffman's home to execute a search warrant, they found him sitting at his computer with child sexual abuse material on the screen. In Grand Saline, a 69-year-old man named Walter Lynn Baird was arrested after police found child pornography on several electronic devices in his home. In Lubbock, Eduardo de Rossi Boren, who was 26 years old, was charged with online solicitation of a minor for sexual conduct. Another Lubbock man named Eric Plemons, also 26, was charged with 2 counts of possession with intent to promote child pornography and 1 count of possession of child pornography. Law enforcement leaders held a major press conference in June 2025 to announce the results of Operation Soteria Shield. FBI Dallas Special Agent in charge R. Joseph Rothrock spoke to reporters about the operation. He said that Operation Soteria Shield brought together more than 70 agencies from across Texas, including police departments, federal agencies, state and federal prosecutors, children's advocacy centers, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Everyone had a common goal, which was to rescue children from abuse and exploitation. Rothrock emphasized that this was not an easy operation, but it was a necessary one. The FBI and law enforcement partners would continue to protect children in their communities and hold child predators accountable for their crimes. He noted that 109 children who had been rescued were children who were once voiceless and invisible, but were now seen and protected. The majority of the children rescued were from North Texas, and the majority of offenders arrested were also from North Texas. Dallas Police Chief Daniel C. Como spoke about how proud he was that the Dallas Police Department served as the lead agency for the North Texas Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. He said Operation Soteria Shield was a massive team effort and a powerful reminder of what law enforcement can accomplish when they unite around one clear mission: protecting kids and holding offenders accountable. Como was grateful to the many agencies who contributed to the successful operation. Plano Police Chief Ed Drain talked about the broader impact of what they had accomplished. He said that online exploitation of children is one of the most insidious crimes society faces. It reaches into every community, crosses every boundary, and leaves lasting harm on its youngest victims. Operation Soteria Shield brought together an unprecedented level of collaboration and resolve to confront this crisis head-on. Through the operation, law enforcement not only rescued children from unimaginable abuse, but also sent a clear message: those who seek to harm children online will be found and brought to justice. Chief Drain acknowledged that their work was far from over, but this effort had made communities safer and brought hope to those who needed it most. Garland Police Chief Jeff Bryan said that the Garland Police Department was proud to stand alongside their local, state, and federal partners in the fight against those who exploit the most vulnerable members of society. Operation Soteria Shield was more than an enforcement effort. It was a mission to rescue, protect, and restore hope. The scale of the operation sent a strong message: predators will be pursued, and survivors will never stand alone. Eastern District of Texas Acting U.S. Attorney Jay Combs spoke about how the numbers from Operation Soteria Shield left him breathless. The numbers of offenders arrested and children rescued in the operation were stunning, but Combs emphasized that at some level, everyone involved understood that behind every statistic and every number, there was a child with dreams, aspirations, and the right to live a life free from sexual exploitation. His office was committed to teaming with law enforcement to investigate and prosecute these cases with urgency and ferocity in order to protect children. Nancy Larson, who was the acting U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Texas, said simply that child predators must be stopped. That was why everyone was there. That was what Operation Soteria Shield had been about. The Eastern District of Texas U.S. Attorney's Office announced that grand juries had already returned indictments against individuals, not only for distributing child pornography, but also for sexually exploiting children to produce child sexual abuse material. These indictments meant that federal prosecutors were moving forward with criminal cases that would likely result in significant prison sentences for those convicted. Over 368 total charges were filed as a result of Operation Soteria Shield. Each charge represented an alleged crime committed against a child. The legal process would take years to work through all of these cases, but prosecutors were determined to hold every single offender accountable. Beyond the arrests and rescues, Operation Soteria Shield served an important function in raising public awareness. Many parents had no idea how prevalent online child exploitation had become. They did not realize that predators were actively hunting for victims on the same social media platforms and gaming apps their kids used every day. The operation showed that this was not something happening in faraway places to other people's children. This was happening in Texas communities. It was happening to kids whose parents thought they were safe at home. The scale of the problem was much bigger than most people understood. Law enforcement officials used the press conference and media coverage to educate parents about warning signs to watch for. If a child suddenly became very secretive about their online activity, that could be a red flag. If they were spending excessive amounts of time online, especially late at night when parents were asleep, that deserved attention. If they received gifts or packages from people the parents did not know, that was concerning. If they became withdrawn, anxious, or showed changes in behavior, it might indicate something was wrong. Officials encouraged parents to have open conversations with their children about online safety. They urged families to monitor what kids were doing online without being invasive in a way that destroyed trust. And they emphasized that children needed to know they could always come to their parents if someone online made them uncomfortable or asked them to do something inappropriate. The participating agencies in Operation Soteria Shield expressed deep gratitude to everyone involved. The list of agencies that contributed was extensive and showed the true scope of the collaboration. In addition to the lead agencies already mentioned, participants included the Abilene Police Department, Allen Police Department, Alvarado Police Department, Amarillo Police Department, Arlington Police Department, Army Criminal Investigative Division, Aubrey Police Department, Azle Police Department, Bartonville Police Department, Breckenridge Police Department, Cedar Hill Police Department, Claiborne Police Department, Colleyville Police Department, Crowley Police Department, Dalhart Police Department, Dawson County Sheriff's Office, DeSoto Police Department, Elm Ridge Police Department, Ennis Police Department, Euless Police Department, Fannin County Sheriff's Office, Fate Police Department, FBI El Paso Field Office, FBI San Antonio Field Office, Grand Prairie Police Department, Grand Saline Police Department, Grayson County Sheriff's Office, Haltom City Police Department, Homeland Security Investigations, Honeygrove Police Department, Hearst Police Department, Irving Police Department, Johnson County Sheriff's Office, Joshua Police Department, Kaufman County Sheriff's Office, Kaufman Police Department, La Mesa Police Department, Lone Star Police Department, and many others. The Texas Department of Public Safety contributed resources. Multiple children's advocacy centers provided victim services. The collaboration extended beyond Texas borders, with the Arkansas State Patrol assisting on at least one case. Operation Soteria Shield stood as a powerful example of what coordinated interagency cooperation could accomplish. It reflected the shared commitment of law enforcement professionals across Texas to relentlessly pursue those who prey on children and to ensure that survivors were no longer silenced or hiding in the shadows. For the 109 children who were rescued, Operation Soteria Shield marked the beginning of a long journey toward healing. These kids had endured unimaginable trauma. Many of them would need extensive counseling and support services. Children's advocacy centers and victim assistance programs would work with them and their families to provide the resources needed for recovery. Some children would have to testify in court cases against their abusers, which would be difficult but important for justice. Law enforcement hoped that by stopping these predators and holding them accountable, they could help the victims find closure and move forward with their lives. The operation also had an impact that extended beyond the immediate arrests and rescues. The massive amount of digital evidence seized would be analyzed for months and possibly years to come. Forensic analysts would go through the data, looking for additional victims who could be identified and rescued. They would search for links to other predators who were part of distribution networks. Each piece of evidence had the potential to lead to new investigations and new cases. Authorities expected that Operation Soteria Shield would continue to generate arrests and victim identifications long after the initial 30-day operation ended. The operation sent a message to anyone who thought they could exploit children online and get away with it. Law enforcement agencies across Texas were watching. They had the skills, the technology, and the determination to find predators no matter how carefully those predators tried to hide. The internet was not anonymous. Digital evidence could be traced. And law enforcement agencies were willing to dedicate massive resources to protecting children. Operation Soteria Shield showed that if someone chose to hurt kids, an army of investigators would come after them with everything they had. For the community members who learned about Operation Soteria Shield through news coverage, the operation was both shocking and reassuring. It was shocking to learn that 244 predators had been arrested in just 1 month from one state. It was disturbing to realize that 109 children had needed to be rescued from exploitation. The numbers suggested that online child exploitation was far more widespread than most people realized. But it was also reassuring to see law enforcement taking the issue seriously and dedicating significant resources to fighting it. The collaboration between so many different agencies showed a unified commitment to protecting the most vulnerable members of society. As forensic analysis of the seized evidence continued through the summer and fall of 2025, investigators discovered additional victims and built new cases. The full impact of Operation Soteria Shield would not be known for years. But in those 30 days, in April 2025, law enforcement across Texas proved that when agencies work together with a shared mission, they can accomplish something extraordinary. They rescued 109 children, they arrested 244 predators, they seized massive amounts of evidence, and they sent an unmistakable message that children in Texas had an army of dedicated professionals standing between them and those who would do them harm. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 1986 Cokeville Elementary School hostage crisis, Wyoming, USA. The 1986 Cokeville Elementary School hostage crisis, Wyoming, USA. On May 16, 1986, the small town of Cokeville, Wyoming, experienced something that seemed impossible in their quiet community. A man and his wife walked into the town's only elementary school with a homemade bomb and enough weapons to kill everyone inside. They took 154 people hostage. 136 were children between the ages of 5 and 12. 18 were adults, including teachers, staff, and visitors who happened to be at the school that afternoon. For 2.5 hours, those hostages sat in a crowded classroom with a gasoline bomb that could explode at any moment. When the bomb finally did go off, it should have killed everyone in the room. Instead, the only people who died that day were the 2 who had planned the attack. Every single hostage survived. What happened in that classroom became known as the Cokeville Miracle. Cokeville is located in Lincoln County in southwestern Wyoming, right near the Idaho border. In 1986, only about 500 people lived in the town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Children grew up knowing they could turn to any adult in the community for help. Trust was a huge part of life in Cokeville. Parents felt completely safe letting their kids walk to school or play outside without supervision. The elementary school had about 100 students total. Nobody locked their doors. The idea that something violent could happen at the school never crossed anyone's mind. David Young was 43 years old in 1986. He had actually lived in Cokeville before. In the 1970s, he had been hired as the town marshal, which was essentially the police chief for Cokeville. He had earned a degree in criminal justice from Chadron State College in Nebraska. But David only lasted 6 months as town marshal. He was fired after his probationary period ended. The reasons for his dismissal varied depending on who told the story, but it was clear the town did not want him as their lawman. While he was in Cokeville, David met a woman named Doris Waters. She was a divorcee who worked as a waitress and singer in a local bar. She was 47 years old. David and Doris got married, and shortly after their wedding, they left Cokeville and moved to Tucson, Arizona. David was a deeply troubled man who spent years wrestling with philosophical questions about existence, the afterlife, and spirituality. He wrote constantly in journals, developing ideas that made sense only to him. His wife Doris had to work part-time jobs as a housekeeper and waitress to support them because David spent most of his time focused on his writings rather than earning money. They lived in a mobile home with Princess, who was David's youngest daughter from his first marriage. David had 2 daughters total, but he was estranged from his older child. In Arizona, David became increasingly reclusive. He developed a philosophy he called 0 equals infinity. The ideas in his writings were confusing and disconnected from reality. David also came up with what he called the biggie. This was supposedly a plan to get rich quick and create what he referred to as a brave new world. He told his longtime friends Gerald Deppy and Doyle Mendenhall about the biggie and convinced them to invest money in his scheme. Both men thought David was working on some kind of legitimate business opportunity or maybe inventing something. They had no idea what the biggie really was. David tested his plan before going to Cokeville. He built a bomb similar to the one he would later take into the school. He set off this test bomb inside a sealed school bus somewhere in Arizona. The bomb completely destroyed the bus, which showed David that his device would work. David and Doris believed in reincarnation. They were deeply spiritual people, even though they were not part of any organized religion. David believed that if he blew up the elementary school in Cokeville with all the children inside, those children would be transported to his brave new world where he would reign as God over them. He knew that Cokeville's elementary school had above-average achievement scores. He wanted intelligent children in his new world. He had also written in his journal that he knew the close-knit community of Cokeville would respond if you threatened one person because everyone cared about each other. "Threaten one, and all are at your mercy," he wrote. On May 16, 1986, David and Doris drove to Cokeville with Princess, David's daughter. 2 friends, Gerald Deppy and Doyle Mendenhall, came along in a separate vehicle. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, David and Doris pulled up to Cokeville Elementary School in a white van. They unloaded a homemade bomb that they had wheeled into a small 2-wheeled shopping cart. The bomb was constructed with 2 baskets stacked on top of each other. In the top basket was a gallon milk jug filled with gasoline. This jug was wired with a blasting cap. In the bottom basket were 2 tuna fish cans filled with a mixture of aluminum powder and flour. These materials were meant to spread through the air and ignite after the explosion, creating a massive fireball. Each tuna can had its own blasting cap. Throughout both baskets were chain links, gunpowder, and boxes of ammunition that would act as shrapnel. The bomb had the explosive force equivalent to 25 sticks of dynamite. The trigger mechanism was a dead man's switch. David attached this trigger to his wrist with a string. The mechanism was basically a clothespin with a wooden piece separating 2 metal connectors. If David let go, or if someone pulled the string from his wrist, the wooden piece would come out, the metal connectors would touch, and the bomb would explode immediately. This meant David held everyone's life in his hand at all times. In addition to the bomb, David and Doris brought 5 rifles and 5 handguns into the school. Princess, Depe, and Mendenhall had no idea until that moment that the biggie involved taking over a school. When David finally revealed his true plan, all 3 of them refused to participate. Princess helped her father and Doris unload the bomb and weapons from the van, but then she refused to go any further. David surprisingly let her leave. Princess immediately drove the van, with Depe and Mendenhall still handcuffed inside, to the town hall. She reported what was happening to authorities there. Because all 3 of them refused to participate and actively tried to stop the plan, none of them were ever charged with any crimes related to the incident. David went directly to the school office. Secretary Christine Cook was working at her desk when David walked in and announced, "This is a revolution. We are taking this school hostage." He forced Cook to unplug her phone and the principal's phone so they could not call for help. He rounded up the staff members who were in the office and herded them down the hallway at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Doris went from classroom to classroom, collecting students and teachers. She told them there was either an emergency, a surprise assembly, or something special happening in one of the classrooms. Most of the younger children happily followed her, thinking they were going to see something fun. Doris also collected a UPS driver who happened to be making a delivery and a woman who was at the school that afternoon to apply for a job. Eventually, Doris herded everyone into one room. It was a classroom designed to hold about 30 students. Now there were 154 people crammed inside. First-grade teacher Janelle Dayton was in the office doing prep work when David arrived. She noticed a white van pull up and thought nothing of it since delivery vehicles came to that entrance regularly. But then she was corralled into the room with everyone else. Teachers immediately recognized that this was an extremely dangerous situation, but they had to stay calm so the children would not panic. David positioned himself in the center of the room with the bomb in its shopping cart and his arsenal of weapons. He had the children sit on the floor. With so many people in such a small space, it was hot and crowded. David met with the principal, Max Exel. He told the principal that he had a disagreement with the federal government, and this was his way to make them listen. He demanded $2 million for each hostage. With 154 hostages, that added up to $308 million total. He also demanded an audience with President Ronald Reagan and wanted Congress to convene and appropriate funds for the ransom. He had previously sent copies of his Zero Equals Infinity manifesto to Reagan and various media outlets and colleges. David handed out more copies of this manifesto to the hostages. The writings made no sense to anyone who read them. David showed everyone that the bomb trigger was attached to his wrist with the string. He explained that if he went down and the wooden wedge pulled out, the whole school would blow sky high. He said if his demands were not met, he would detonate the bomb and send the students to his brave new world, where he would rule over them. The threat was very real. Everyone in that room understood they could all die in an instant if David decided to pull that trigger. News of the crisis spread through Cokeville almost immediately. Princess had reported it to the town hall, and within minutes, law enforcement was responding. Parents whose children were at the school that afternoon raced toward the building. Police set up perimeter lines to keep people back, but it was incredibly difficult. In a town where family meant everything, parents were desperate to get to their children. Some parents had multiple kids inside the school. The anguish of waiting outside, not knowing if your child was alive, was unbearable for many families. Prayer circles formed all over town. In this predominantly Mormon community, people turned to faith and prayer as they waited for news. Inside the classroom, teachers did everything they could to keep the children calm. The gasoline from the bomb was creating strong fumes that made many people feel sick and gave them headaches. Some children started crying or asking when they could go home. Teachers quietly sang songs with the kids, told them stories, and tried to make it seem like everything was okay. The little ones did not fully understand the danger they were in. Older students were more aware that the man with the bomb could kill them all. As time passed, some hostages were released. Accounts vary on exactly when and how many, but David did let some people go during the standoff. However, most of the hostages remained trapped in that hot, overcrowded room with a gasoline bomb and an unstable man who believed he was a prophet. About 2.5 hours into the ordeal, David became increasingly agitated. He decided he needed to go to the bathroom. There was a small bathroom that connected the first grade room to the second grade room. Before he left, David transferred the trigger mechanism from his own wrist to Doris's wrist. He showed her how to hold it and warned her not to let the wooden wedge come out of the clothespin. Then he went into the bathroom and closed the door. Doris was left alone with the bomb strapped to her wrist and 154 hostages watching her. The gasoline fumes in the room were overwhelming by this point. Doris developed a terrible headache from the fumes. Without thinking about what she was doing, she raised her hand to touch her forehead. This simple motion was enough to lift her arm and accidentally activate the trigger. The bomb exploded. The blast was massive. Doris was standing right next to the bomb when it went off, and the explosion engulfed her in flames. She was thrown backward and severely burned. Fire and thick black smoke instantly filled the room. Children close to the bomb suffered burns. The heat and flames created chaos and terror. But something remarkable happened that saved most of the people in that room. Teachers had opened windows earlier because of the heat and fumes. When the bomb exploded, much of the force of the blast went upward and out through the open windows and through the ceiling tiles. The ceiling tiles had been able to lift up and down, which absorbed a significant amount of the explosion. If the room had been sealed tight like the school bus David tested his bomb in, everyone would have died. But the open windows and loose ceiling tiles created vents that channeled the explosive force away from the hostages. The bomb also malfunctioned in ways that saved lives. The gasoline jug had been leaking before it exploded. Gasoline had dripped down into the tuna cans containing the aluminum powder and flour. This turned the powder into a paste. When the bomb went off, the paste could not aerosolize and spread through the air the way David had planned. The planned fireball that should have crawled across the ceiling and down the walls, engulfing everyone, did not happen. Additionally, when investigators later examined the bomb components, they found that the wires to one of the blasting caps had been cut clean through. Nobody could explain how or when this happened. Bomb technician Rich Haskell later said he looked all over the device, trying to figure out what cut those wires, but he could not explain it. Immediately after the explosion, teachers sprang into action. They started pushing and shoving children toward the hallway and toward the two open windows. They literally threw kids through the windows onto the grass outside. Teachers helped students escape however they could. Some children jumped, some were pushed, some crawled through the smoke. Panic spread outside as parents saw children coming through windows and tried to break through police lines to reach them. David heard the explosion from the bathroom. He opened the door and saw his wife Doris thrashing on the floor in excruciating pain, covered in burns. He shot her in the head, killing her. Music teacher John Miller was trying to flee the chaos and get children to safety. David saw Miller and shot him in the back, wounding him. Then David went back into the bathroom and shot himself in the head, committing suicide. With both David and Doris Young dead, the danger was finally over. Staff members had carried Doris's body out of the building in an attempt to get her medical help, not realizing she was already dead from the gunshot. Her body was found on the front lawn outside the school. David's body was found in the bathroom. All of the remaining hostages made it out of the building alive. A grim search began to count and identify survivors. Parents stood outside waiting to see if their children were among the living. For the first hour after the explosion, nobody knew how many had been killed. Some people expected to find dead bodies everywhere, but after they searched the entire building and counted everyone, the final numbers were stunning. 79 of the 154 hostages were treated for injuries. Most suffered second-degree burns and smoke inhalation. Some burns were serious and required hospital treatment. John Miller, who had been shot by David, survived his injury, but not a single hostage had been killed. David and Doris Young were the only two people who died that day. In a situation where everyone should have perished in a massive explosion, somehow all 154 hostages survived. It defied explanation. The injured were taken to hospitals in Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah for treatment. Children with burns were transported to facilities that could handle their injuries. Families were reunited with their children at hospitals and at the school. The relief and joy was overwhelming. Parents who had prepared themselves for the worst possible news instead got to hold their children again. Many survivors and their families believed divine intervention had saved them. Multiple witnesses, both children and adults, later reported seeing angels in the classroom during the crisis. Some described seeing beautiful figures dressed in white who helped protect them and guide them to safety. Children told stories of deceased grandparents or relatives who appeared to them and told them where to go or what to do. The community of Cokeville struggled in the aftermath. This quiet town where nothing bad ever happened had suddenly experienced a trauma that would stay with them forever. Some survivors later said that even decades after the event, certain smells like gasoline or sounds like fireworks would trigger upsetting memories of that day. For most people in Cokeville, the nightmares eventually subsided, and life returned to some normalcy. But nobody would ever forget what happened on May 16, 1986. Investigators worked to understand what had gone wrong with David Young's bomb and why it had not killed everyone as he intended. The evidence suggested multiple failures in the bomb's design, combined with environmental factors like the open windows and ceiling tiles. Some evidence, like the mysteriously cut wires, could not be easily explained through normal investigation. The idea that something miraculous had occurred took hold in the community and spread far beyond Cokeville. Books were written about the incident. Hart and Judine Wixom, whose son Cameron was a student at the school that day, wrote a book called Trial by Terror: The Child Hostage Crisis in Cokeville, Wyoming. They later wrote another book titled When Angels Intervene to Save the Children: The Cokeville, Wyoming Bombing Incident. In 2006, the Cokeville Miracle Foundation compiled a book of recollections called Witness to Miracles, Remembering the Cokeville Elementary School Bombing. This book included memories from parents, emergency workers, and former hostages. The Wyoming State Archives also created an oral history project called Survivor is My Name, collecting audio interviews and written transcripts from people involved in the incident. The story was featured on television shows including Unsolved Mysteries, Unexplained Mysteries, Sightings, It's a Miracle, and I Survived. CBS made a television movie called To Save the Children, starring Richard Thomas and Robert Ulrich. In 2015, a feature film called The Cokeville Miracle was released, dramatizing the events of that day. For the people who lived through the Cokeville crisis, their perspectives on what happened varied. Some embraced the miracle narrative wholeheartedly. They believed God had intervened to save the children and that angels had physically been present in the classroom that day. Others acknowledged that luck and circumstance had combined in remarkable ways, but were less comfortable attributing it to divine intervention. First-grade teacher Janelle Dayton later said she thought Doris was just going along with David, and that David himself was crazy because cause and effect did not add up for him. Bomb technician Rich Haskell said he expected to see dead bodies everywhere when he arrived at the scene, but instead found survivors. He could not explain the evidence he saw when examining the bomb. Lead investigator Ron Hartley, whose 4 children were all hostages that day, worked on the case while dealing with his own trauma as a father. The broader community grappled with difficult theological questions. If God had saved the children at Cokeville, why did he not save children at Columbine or Sandy Hook or other school tragedies? This question troubled even faithful believers. Some people preferred not to overthink it and simply felt grateful that this particular story had a happy ending when it so easily could have been the worst school disaster in American history. 10 years after the bombing, some media outlets wanted to do anniversary coverage of the story. But many people in Cokeville found it too painful to relive the experience. They wanted to move forward rather than constantly looking back. The story was controlled in many ways by the Mormon community, who were quick to frame it as a miracle while also embracing people of all faiths in that declaration. Other details of the incident were compelling on their own, even without the religious context. The fact that Princess Young and David's two friends refused to participate and immediately alerted authorities showed that ordinary people can make heroic choices when confronted with evil plans. The quick response of law enforcement and emergency services demonstrated professional crisis management. The courage of the teachers who stayed with their students and helped them escape through smoke and flames was remarkable. David Young was buried in an unmarked grave. Cokeville rebuilt and moved forward. The elementary school continued to operate and children kept attending. Parents who survived the crisis, as students eventually brought their own children to the same school years later. The building was repaired and looked much the same as it had before. But everyone who walked through those doors knew what had happened there. First grader Jeremiah Moore was photographed the week after the incident being held by his father, George Moore. Jeremiah was one of several children injured when the bomb went off. Pictures from the aftermath showed children's bikes lying in the grass outside the school and investigators flagging evidence near Doris Young's body. For the children who survived, the experience shaped their lives in different ways. Some became advocates for school safety or worked in fields where they could help others. Some struggled with trauma for years. One girl who had been absent from school that day later described the intense guilt she felt for not being there to help her friends and younger brother. Many survivors said that as frightening as the experience was, they felt protected throughout it. They believed someone or something had been watching over them. The Cokeville Elementary School hostage crisis remains one of the most unusual school incidents in American history. It came at a time before school shootings and bombings were common enough that schools started locking doors and having active shooter drills. In 1986, the idea of violence in an elementary school was still shocking and incomprehensible. Cokeville was supposed to be safe. Small towns like this were where people moved to get away from danger and crime. The fact that something so terrible could happen in such an innocent place shook the nation. What saved those 154 hostages on May 16, 1986? Was it angels, luck, physics, poor bomb construction, or a combination of all these factors? The answer probably depends on who you ask and what they choose to believe. But regardless of the explanation, the outcome was the same. Every hostage survived when none of them should have. Every parent got their child back when they had prepared themselves for loss. A community that could have been destroyed by unimaginable tragedy instead became a story of survival, resilience, and hope. The teachers, students, parents, first responders, and ordinary citizens of Cokeville showed strength and courage in the face of terror. And decades later, their story continues to inspire people who hear it. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, when evil seems to have the upper hand, there is always a chance for survival, for miracles both explainable and unexplainable, and for communities to come together and heal. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the 2024 rescue of children from the Lev Tahor sect, Guatemala. The 2024 rescue of children from the Lev Tahor sect, Guatemala. On December 20th, 2024, Guatemalan authorities conducted a large-scale raid on a farm compound in Oratorio, a municipality about 55 miles southeast of Guatemala City. The target was Lev Tahor, an extremist ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect that had been under investigation for serious crimes against children. Over 400 police officers, soldiers, social workers, and psychologists participated in the operation. By the end of the day, authorities had removed 160 minors and 40 women from the compound and placed them under protective custody. What investigators discovered at the farm would confirm the worst fears about what had been happening inside this secretive community. Lev Tahor, which means pure heart in Hebrew, was founded in 1988 in Jerusalem, Israel, by a man named Shlomo Helbrands. The group follows an extremely strict and austere interpretation of Jewish law that goes far beyond mainstream Orthodox Judaism. Members dress in ways that remind people of the Taliban, with women and girls covered from head to toe in black robes. The sect places tight controls on every aspect of daily life, including diet, dress, prayer, and relationships. Members are largely shielded from the outside world. Little is known about the inner workings of the group because it operates in secrecy, and members are discouraged from speaking to outsiders. From the beginning, Lev Tahor faced allegations of abuse and illegal activities. The sect has moved repeatedly across international borders, always staying one step ahead of authorities. At various times, members have sought refuge in Canada, the United States, Mexico, Guatemala, Iran, Bosnia, and Morocco. Each time law enforcement started investigating them, the group would pack up and move to a different location. In the mid-2010s, they settled in Guatemala, first setting up a compound in Guatemala City before eventually moving to a more remote farm in Oratorio, close to the border with El Salvador. They had been expelled from an indigenous village in Guatemala in 2014 due to conflicts with locals, which is what prompted their move to Oratorio. The community in Guatemala was made up of roughly 50 families from various countries including Guatemala, the United States, Canada, Israel, and others. Estimates suggested that out of the approximately 200 people living at the compound, about 150 held Israeli citizenship, while the rest were citizens of Guatemala, the United States, or Canada. Some children had been born in Guatemala itself. The sect insisted they were simply practicing their religion according to their beliefs and accused authorities of religious persecution whenever investigations began. But the evidence that built up over years painted a much darker picture of what was really happening behind the closed gates of their compounds. In 2021, 2 leaders of Lev Tahor were convicted in New York of kidnapping and child sexual exploitation crimes. According to prosecutors, these leaders had kidnapped 2 children from their mother. The purpose was to return a 14-year-old girl to what prosecutors described as an illegal sexual relationship with an adult male. This case provided concrete evidence that forced child marriages were happening within the sect and that leaders would go to extreme lengths, including kidnapping, to maintain control over members. In 2022, Mexican authorities conducted an operation in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas, right on the Guatemalan border. They arrested a leader of the sect and removed a number of women and children from a Lev Tahor compound. The Mexican operation was based on suspicions of abuse against minors. This showed that the problems within Lev Tahor were not isolated incidents but part of a pattern happening wherever the group settled. By November 2024, 4 minors managed to escape from the Lev Tahor compound in Guatemala. These were not Guatemalan residents. They made their way to authorities and gave formal statements about what they had experienced and witnessed inside the sect. Their testimonies were shocking. They described forced marriages of children. They reported physical abuse and mistreatment. They spoke about rape. They detailed a system where children were essentially trafficked within the sect, being married off to adults and moved between different members. Based on these testimonies and the evidence gathered, prosecutors determined there were probable grounds to believe serious crimes were being committed against children at the compound. On November 11, 2024, 11 minors who had fled the sect filed formal complaints with the public prosecutor's office in Guatemala. Investigators began building a case. They gathered evidence and conducted medical examinations of the children who had escaped. Nancy Paez, a prosecutor at Guatemala's prosecutor's office against human trafficking, later explained that based on the statements of the complainants, the evidence obtained, and the medical examinations, Authorities were able to establish that there were forms of human trafficking against these minors. The crimes identified included forced marriage, abuse, and related offenses. Authorities had actually tried to check on the welfare of the children at the compound before the raid, but members of Lev Tahor blocked officials from entering the farm. They refused to allow inspections or welfare checks. This obstruction made it clear that a forced entry would be necessary to reach the children and determine what was happening inside. Public Prosecutor Dimas Jimenez coordinated the planning for the operation. The raid needed to be large-scale because the sect was known to resist authorities. Intelligence suggested there were many children at the compound who might be in immediate danger. Interior Minister Francisco Jimenez emphasized that the protection of boys and girls was an absolute priority. The decision was made to conduct the operation on Friday, December 20th, 2024. That Friday morning, over 400 officers from the National Civil Police arrived at the farm compound in Oratorio. They were accompanied by members of the Guatemalan military to provide additional support and security. Social workers and psychologists were brought along because authorities knew they would be dealing with traumatized children who had been living in an isolated, controlling environment. The operation was carried out under the authority of Guatemala's Attorney General's office, with support from the Ministry of the Interior. When authorities entered the compound, they found 160 minors living in conditions that confirmed the worst allegations. These were children and teenagers ranging in age from infants to adolescents. Many were malnourished. According to family members who later spoke publicly, the children had been fed extremely limited diets, consisting mainly of cucumbers, tomatoes, and matzah. They were forbidden from receiving basic affection like hugs. The living conditions were poor, and the children showed signs of neglect and abuse. 40 women were also removed from the compound during the raid. Many of these women were mothers of the children, but the control structure within Lev Tahor was such that the children did not really belong to individual families. Instead, as one family member later described it, the children belonged to the cult itself. It was a network of rotating control where any child could be abused by any adult in the group. Children could be moved between different adults, married off, or reassigned at the whim of the leadership. During the search of the compound, investigators made a grim discovery. They found suspected bones of at least one child buried on the property. The Attorney General's office reported this finding publicly. Authorities opened several graves at the compound to conduct examinations and determine if there were suspicions of murder. The discovery of buried remains raised the horrifying possibility that children had died at the compound under suspicious circumstances. Forensic analysis would be needed to determine the age of the remains, cause of death, and identity. Officers also confiscated computers, phones, and other electronic equipment as potential evidence. They seized documents and materials that would help build criminal cases against those responsible for the abuse. The raid netted a substantial amount of evidence that would take months to fully analyze. Getting the children out of the compound was not easy. Adult members of Lev Tahor immediately began shouting instructions to the children in Yiddish, telling them to resist and not cooperate with police. Members could be heard saying, "There are police surrounding the entire compound. All the children should push the officers at the same time. It is permissible to hit the officers. They are not allowed to hit you back. Climb up and get out from above." The adults were actively encouraging children to fight against the officers trying to rescue them. This showed the level of control and indoctrination the sect had over even the youngest members. Despite the resistance, authorities successfully removed all 160 children and 40 women from the property. They were transported to Guatemala City, where they were placed under the care of the Secretariat of Social Welfare, which is part of the President's office. The children were taken to a facility called the Alida España de Arana Special Education School, where they could be housed, fed, given medical attention, and kept safe while investigations continued and family situations were sorted out. Public Prosecutor Dimas Jimenez held a press conference shortly after the raid. He explained that the operation had been conducted due to suspicions of forced pregnancy, mistreatment of minors, and rape. He emphasized that the minors were allegedly being abused by members of the Lev Tahor sect and that authorities had a duty to protect them. The Attorney General's office released photos from the operation showing officers with children at the compound, documenting the rescue operation. Interior Minister Francisco Jimenez also spoke publicly about the raid. He stated clearly that the farm compound in Oratorio had been raided by authorities to rescue 160 minors who were allegedly being abused by members of the Lev Tahor sect. He stressed that the National Civil Police and military members had participated in the operation and that protecting boys and girls was an absolute priority for the government. But the rescue operation was just the beginning of what would become an ongoing struggle. On Sunday, December 22nd, just 2 days after the raid, about 100 relatives of the children who belonged to the Lev Tahor sect gathered outside the care center in Guatemala City, where the children were being held. They demanded the return of the children. Uriel Goldman, who identified himself as a representative of the families, told reporters that they wanted the children released. He claimed that authorities were telling lies with false accusations. He insisted this was religious persecution and that the government was violating their rights. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon local time on that Sunday, members of the sect broke into the care center. They forced open the gate and entered the facility where the children were sheltered. In the chaos that followed, they managed to abduct some of the children who had been rescued just 2 days earlier. The Attorney General's office issued a statement saying that sect members had broken in and taken children and adolescents who had been sheltered there. With police help, authorities managed to locate and protect most of them again quickly. However, the Secretariat of Social Welfare later clarified that some children had evaded authorities during the break-in. A search alert was activated for the missing children. Some children were recovered on Sunday, while others were found early Monday. The fact that sect members had violently broken into a government facility to recapture children showed how determined Lev Tahor was to maintain control over these minors. It also demonstrated that the children were not safe even in government custody if security measures were not adequate. The situation inside the care facilities became increasingly difficult. Members of Lev Tahor who were in custody refused to cooperate with authorities. On Wednesday night, January 8, 2025, the women, children, and teenagers in custody attacked police and government personnel at the facility. Guatemala's Secretariat of Social Welfare reported that during this incident, members of the group destroyed furniture and supplies. They broke windows, injuring several people with shards of glass. The violence and destruction showed that even separated from the compound, the indoctrination and control mechanisms of the sect remained powerful. Members who were not in custody continued to protest outside the shelter. Local media reported on the ongoing demonstrations. The sect maintained that they were victims of religious persecution and that the government had no right to take their children, but prosecutors countered that this was not about religion. It was about protecting children from abuse, forced marriage, rape, and human trafficking. The legal situation became extremely complicated. Instead of treating the Lev Tahor case as a collective rescue from institutional abuse, Guatemalan courts broke the situation into over 100 separate custody trials. Each case required family members from outside the sect to prove individually that a specific parent was unfit, even when that parent was part of an internationally condemned group with documented cases of abuse. This fragmented legal approach created huge challenges for those trying to permanently rescue the children from the sect. Orit Cohen, whose brother, sister-in-law, and 4 nephews had joined Lev Tahor 15 years earlier, became one of the most vocal advocates for the rescued children. She gave interviews explaining the situation and pushing for international intervention. Cohen described how the children were not really with their parents in any normal sense. They belonged to the cult as a whole, she explained. It was a network of rotating control where any child could be abused by any adult in the group. She said the children were fed extremely limited diets, and forbidden from receiving basic affection. Some were handed over to cult leaders who raped them. Cohen argued that the children were hostages, emotionally, legally, and physically. According to Cohen and other family members, the fragmented approach of the Guatemalan legal system was enabling Lev Tahor to manipulate the process. The sect filed false accusations of sexual abuse and violence against relatives trying to rescue the children. Family members who attempted to gain custody found themselves accused of being the abusers. Some relatives were driven away in fear. The situation created a bizarre reality where people trying to save children were treated like criminals, while actual abusers within the sect were protected by the legal proceedings. The Jewish community in Guatemala issued a statement making clear that they were not connected to Lev Tahor and supported the Guatemalan authorities in carrying out necessary investigations to protect the lives and integrity of minors and other vulnerable groups at risk. The community called on governments and organizations from countries whose citizens were members of Lev Tahor to cooperate in protecting those whose rights might be violated. Mainstream Jewish organizations worldwide have consistently condemned Lev Tahor and do not recognize the sect as representing legitimate Judaism. Israeli authorities became involved in the case because so many of the children held Israeli citizenship or were eligible for it. Israel's ambassador to Guatemala, Alon Lavi, met with Guatemala's Attorney General, Maria Consuelo Porra Argueta, to discuss the investigation. The two sides agreed to set up a team of prosecutors to work together on the case. Israeli diplomats gave their full backing to the investigation. A delegation from Israel that included representatives from the Foreign Ministry, the Justice Ministry, the State Prosecutor's Office, Israel Police, and experts on cults from the Welfare Ministry traveled to Guatemala to assist. The Israeli Foreign Ministry stated that Israeli authorities were investing their utmost efforts in trying to assist Israeli minors and other helpless individuals in the cult. Member of Knesset Gilad Kariv, who chairs the Knesset's Immigration and Absorption Committee, called the matter one of national urgency. He stated that bringing the children rescued from the Lev Tahor cult in Guatemala to Israel was quite literally a matter of saving lives. These were dozens of minors who either held Israeli citizenship or were eligible for it, he explained. There were Israeli families ready to receive them, and in several cases, official guardianship orders had already been issued. Kariv welcomed the progress made through his committee's involvement, but emphasized the process must continue because this was not a private matter concerning a few families, but a national issue demanding leadership from the Israeli government. However, transferring the children faced significant legal hurdles. Guatemalan law prohibited deporting Guatemalan citizens. For foreign nationals, deportation presented complicated legal challenges. Authorities considered issuing a presidential decree to allow deportation, but sect members had the option to appeal such decisions. The Guatemalan government was trying to find a legal framework that would allow them to get the children to safety, either back to family members in Israel and other countries, or into proper foster care in Guatemala itself. But finding that legal pathway proved difficult. Sources familiar with the situation estimated that all the rescued sect members would ultimately be released because there was no long-term legal basis to hold them in the facility indefinitely. The children could not be kept in government custody forever without proper legal proceedings determining their futures. Behind the scenes, efforts were underway to transfer children to guardians outside of Guatemala, but this required proving that both parents were harming the children, which was difficult to establish in the fragmented individual court cases. The case highlighted the broader challenge of how to deal with extremist sects that operate across international borders. Lev Tahor had successfully evaded justice for decades by simply moving from country to country. When authorities in Canada started investigating, they moved to the United States. When problems arose there, they went to Mexico, then Guatemala. The sect had even briefly tried to establish presence in Iran, Bosnia, and Morocco at various points. This pattern of flight allowed them to continue abusing children because by the time investigations were complete in one location, they had already disappeared to another jurisdiction. Critics noted that Israel might have been one of the few countries where Lev Tahor could have been stopped earlier, but the sect had left Israel in its early years before authorities fully understood the danger. Now, with the group's leadership imprisoned in the United States following the 2021 kidnapping convictions, some observers believe the sect was finally collapsing. But as long as there were dedicated members willing to maintain the system, children remained at risk. The testimonies that emerged from the rescued children were heartbreaking. Many described lives of severe deprivation and control. They spoke of being married off as young teenagers to much older men. They described physical punishments and psychological abuse. The constant indoctrination told them that the outside world was evil, and that leaving the sect meant losing their eternal souls. Even after being rescued, many children struggled because they had been taught their entire lives to fear and hate the authorities who were now trying to help them. Medical examinations of the rescued children revealed evidence consistent with the abuse allegations. Doctors found signs of malnutrition, untreated medical conditions, and in some cases, evidence of sexual abuse. Psychologists who worked with the children reported that they were deeply traumatized and would need extensive therapy and support to recover. Some children were so indoctrinated that they actively fought against their own rescue, believing that being with the sect was their religious duty and that the government was persecuting them. DNA testing was conducted to determine the actual parentage of children because the sect's practice of moving children between adults made it unclear, in many cases, who the biological parents actually were. In some instances, children were being raised by adults who were not their parents at all. This complicated custody determinations because courts needed to identify biological family members who might be able to take custody. As of early 2025, the legal battles continued. Over 100 separate court cases were working their way through the Guatemalan judicial system. Each case involved arguments about parental fitness, religious freedom versus child protection, and the rights of the state to intervene in family matters. Lev Tahor hired lawyers who argued that the entire operation was religious persecution and a violation of their rights to practice their faith freely. Prosecutors countered with evidence of abuse, forced marriage, and rape, arguing that no religious belief justified harming children. The international community watched the case closely. Organizations fighting human trafficking and child abuse saw the Lev Tahor situation as a test case for how to deal with closed religious communities where abuse is systematic. If Guatemala could successfully protect these children and hold perpetrators accountable, despite claims of religious persecution, it would set an important precedent. But if the legal system became too bogged down in procedure and the children ultimately ended up back in the sect, it would send a message that abusive groups could hide behind religion to avoid accountability. The December 20th, 2024 rescue operation undoubtedly saved 160 children from ongoing abuse. The raid itself was successful. Authorities got the children out safely, despite resistance. But the harder work of ensuring those children stayed safe and eventually found stable, loving homes proved to be far more complicated than the initial rescue. As the legal proceedings dragged on through early 2025, advocates like Orit Cohen continued speaking out, emphasizing that every day the children remained in legal limbo was another day their lives were in danger. The situation remained unresolved, with the futures of 160 young lives hanging in the balance while courts, governments, and families fought over what should happen next. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 2025 infant rescue from a trafficking ring in Mumbai, India. The 2025 infant rescue from a trafficking ring in Mumbai, India. On a warm August night in 2025, police officers in Mumbai caught two women red-handed as they tried to sell a baby boy who was only 6 days old. The infant had been born just 1 week earlier on August 1st at a government hospital in the Shivaji Nagar area of Govandi, a neighborhood in eastern Mumbai where many poor families live. The baby was being sold for 5.5 lakh rupees, which is about 6,600 American dollars. This was not a simple crime of opportunity. It was part of a bigger network that bought and sold newborn babies across the city. The story really begins 3 months before the rescue. Back in May of 2025, a social activist named Dr. Binu Varghese got information from someone he knew. The tip said that a young man called Samir was selling newborn babies in the Shivaji Nagar locality. Dr. Varghese had spent many years working to stop human trafficking and child abuse in Mumbai. He had helped police catch traffickers before, and the authorities trusted him. When he heard about Samir, he knew he needed to act fast. Babies were in danger. Dr. Varghese did not go straight to the police with just a rumor. He wanted to make sure the information was true before he involved law enforcement. He reached out to a couple he knew from Thane, a city next to Mumbai. Their names were Mayuri and Laxminarayan Vanam. Dr. Varghese asked them if they would be willing to pretend to be buyers who wanted to adopt a baby through illegal channels. It was risky, but they agreed to help. Dr. Varghese gave them Samir's phone number and told them to make contact. The couple called Samir and told him they wanted to buy a baby. Samir did not hesitate at all. He told them he could get them a newborn infant for 4 lakh rupees, which is about 4,800 American dollars. He even demanded 50,000 rupees as an advance payment right away. The couple knew they had to be careful. If they refused to pay anything, Samir might get suspicious. So they gave him 10,000 rupees to keep the deal alive. After that first payment, they stayed in touch with Samir through phone calls and messages. They acted like they were serious buyers who really wanted a child. While this undercover operation was happening, Dr. Varghese went to the police. He reported the case to Additional Deputy Commissioner of Police, Dr. Mahesh Patil. The officer took the information seriously. He passed it on to Deputy Commissioner of Police, Samir Sheikh, who oversees Zone 6 of Mumbai. DCP Sheikh understood how important this case was. He put together a special team to handle the investigation and the rescue operation. The team was led by Police Inspector Dhananjay Shinde from Shivaji Nagar Police Station. Also on the team were Police Sub-Inspector Jayshri Salunke from Shivaji Nagar and Assistant Police Inspector Navnath Kale from Chunabadi Police Station. These officers had experience with trafficking cases and knew how to plan a careful operation. The weeks went by, and Samir kept in contact with the couple. Then at the beginning of August, he told them he had found a baby for them. A woman named Sumaya Irfan Khan had just given birth to a baby boy at SN Hospital in Shivajinagar on August 1st, 2025. The baby was healthy and perfect for adoption, Samir told them. But the price had gone up. Now he wanted 5.5 lakh rupees for the infant. He explained that the money would be split between himself, the baby's parents, and the people who would deliver the child to the buyers. The police knew this was their chance to catch everyone involved in the operation. They needed to plan the trap very carefully. If they moved too early, Samir might run away. If they waited too long, the baby could be in danger. Inspector Shinde and his team worked with Dr. Varghese and the couple to set up a meeting place. They chose Lotus Junction, a spot in Govandi where the handover would happen. The plan was simple. Mayuri and her husband would go to the meeting spot. They would wait for the people bringing the baby. Once those people arrived and asked for the money, the police would move in and arrest them. On Wednesday, August 6th, 2025, everything was ready. The couple went to Lotus Junction with Dr. Varghese. They waited nervously. Police officers were hiding nearby, watching everything. Then 2 women appeared. One was younger, in her 30s. The other was much older, in her 70s. The younger woman was carrying something wrapped in cloth. It was the baby. The older woman walked beside her. They approached Mayuri and her husband and handed over the 6-day-old boy without saying much at first. They even brought hospital documents with them. The papers said the baby's mother was Sumaya Irfan Khan and showed he had been born at SN Hospital on August 1st. The younger woman, whose name was Nazima but who used the name Nazreen, did most of the talking. She told the couple that everything was arranged and the baby was theirs now. Then she asked for the payment. She wanted the full 5.5 lakh rupees right there. That was the signal the police were waiting for. As soon as Nazreen demanded the money, officers rushed in from their hiding spots. They grabbed both women before they could run. Nazreen looked shocked. The older woman, who was her mother and whose name was Fatima Mehmoodali Sheikh, seemed confused about what was happening. The police took the baby gently from them and made sure he was safe. Then they handcuffed both women and took them to Shivaji Nagar police station. The rescue happened late on Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, August 7th, news of the arrest was spreading through Mumbai. But the police were not done yet. They still needed to find Samir, the man who had arranged everything. They also needed to arrest the baby's parents. After all, they had agreed to sell their own child for money. Officers went to the home of Irfan Khan and Sumaya Khan in Shivaji Nagar. When police knocked on their door, they did not run or resist. They knew they had been caught. The couple was arrested and taken to the police station as well. Police learned that the Khans had already received 1 lakh rupees as an advance payment from Samir. That money was their share for agreeing to give up their baby. The rest of the 5.5 lakh rupees was supposed to be divided between Samir, Nazreen, Fatima, and possibly others in the network. But Samir himself was missing. He knew the police were looking for him, and he went into hiding. For 2 days, officers searched for him across Mumbai and in neighboring areas. They tracked his phone, talked to people who knew him, and followed leads. Finally, on Saturday, August 9th, 2025, police found Mohammed Nabil Rizwan Shaikh, also known as Samir. He was only 20 years old, but he was already a known criminal. Police records showed he was a repeat offender who lived in Rafiq Nagar, another part of Govandi. When they arrested him, Samir became the 5th person in custody in connection with this case. Police also discovered that 2 more people were involved, including a nurse from a local hospital who had helped hand over the baby to Nazreen and Fatima. That brought the total number of arrests to 7 people. The baby was examined by doctors right after the rescue to make sure he had not been hurt. Thankfully, he was physically healthy. The police kept him safe while they figured out what would happen next. Under Indian law, when a child is rescued from trafficking or found in a dangerous situation, the case goes to something called the Child Welfare Committee. This committee is made up of people who are trained to decide what is best for children who need care and protection. The committee looks at each case carefully. They consider whether the child can go back to his family or if he needs to be placed somewhere else for his safety. In this case, the baby's own parents had tried to sell him, so going back to them was not an option. The committee would have to find a safe place for the infant, maybe with foster parents or in a children's home until a permanent solution could be found. The police filed criminal charges against all 7 people who were arrested. The charges came from 2 important Indian laws. The first is the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which is India's main criminal code that replaced the old Indian Penal Code in 2023. The police used Section 143, subsection 3, which deals specifically with trafficking of people. They also used Sections 3, subsection 5, and 143, subsection 4, which cover other aspects of selling and buying human beings. The second set of charges came from the POCSO Act, which stands for Protection of Children from Sexual Offenses Act. Even though this case was not about sexual abuse, the POCSO Act has sections that apply to any crime against children. Sections 81 and 87 were used because they deal with trafficking and exploitation of minors. These are very serious charges. If convicted, the accused could face many years in prison. During questioning, police learned more about how the network operated. Samir was not working alone. He was the main person who connected desperate parents with buyers, but he relied on others to do different jobs. Nazima, who used the fake name Nazreen, was particularly important to the operation. Police found out she had done this before. There was already another case of child trafficking registered against her at Govandi police station. This meant she was a repeat offender who knew exactly what she was doing. Her mother Fatima helped her transport babies and deal with buyers. The nurse from the hospital had access to birth records and knew which women had just given birth. She could identify potential targets and pass that information to Samir. The parents, Irfan and Sumaya Khan, were in desperate financial trouble. They had other children to feed and could not afford another baby. When Samir approached them with an offer of money, they agreed to sell their newborn son. The investigation revealed how the trafficking ring targeted specific types of families. They looked for people who were very poor, who already had several children, or who were in debt. Samir would find these families through various sources, including hospital workers, local informants, and even through neighborhood gossip. He would approach the parents and tell them he could help them by finding their baby a good home with a rich family. He made it sound like adoption, but it was really trafficking. He would offer them money, usually between 1 and 2 lakh rupees for the parents, depending on whether the baby was a boy or a girl. Boys were often more valuable because many Indian families prefer male children. Once the parents agreed, Samir would line up buyers. These were usually childless couples who wanted to adopt but did not want to go through the long legal adoption process in India, which can take years. Some buyers knew they were doing something illegal. Others might have believed they were helping a poor family while getting a baby they desperately wanted. The money involved in this case shows how profitable baby trafficking can be. The buyers were paying 5.5 lakh rupees. Out of that, the baby's parents got 1 lakh rupees. Samir probably took 2 to 3 lakh rupees for himself as the main organizer. Nazreen and her mother Fatima would split another lakh or so for delivering the baby. The hospital nurse might have received 50,000 rupees or more for providing information. Even after splitting the money many ways, everyone in the network made a profit. For people living in poverty in Mumbai, these amounts represent months or even years of income. That is why some people were willing to take the risk of getting caught. Mumbai police were proud of this rescue, but they also knew it was just one case among many. Child trafficking is a huge problem across India, and Mumbai is one of the major cities where it happens. According to India's National Crime Records Bureau, thousands of children go missing every year. Many of them end up being trafficked for various purposes, including forced labor, begging, sexual exploitation, and illegal adoption. The trafficking of babies specifically has increased in recent years. There are many reasons for this. Poverty is the biggest cause. When families cannot afford to feed their children, some make the terrible choice to sell a baby. The COVID-19 pandemic made things much worse. Millions of people in India lost their jobs during the lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. With no income and no way to buy food, some families became desperate enough to sell their children. Another factor is the demand side. India has a long and complicated legal adoption process. Couples who want to adopt a child have to go through many steps, including home studies, background checks, and court hearings. The process can take 3 to 5 years, and there is no guarantee of success. For couples desperate to have a child, illegal adoption through traffickers seems like a faster option. They do not realize, or choose to ignore, the fact that they are buying a stolen baby and supporting a criminal network. Some buyers are from India, but police have also found cases where babies were sold to buyers in other countries, including wealthy families in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. The role of Dr. Binu Varghese in this case was crucial. He is well known in Mumbai for his work fighting human trafficking, especially child trafficking and sex trafficking. Over the years, he has worked with police to bust many criminal networks. He does not work for the government. Instead, he is an independent social activist who volunteers his time to help protect vulnerable people. In July 2025, just 1 month before the Shivaji Nagar case, Dr. Varghese had helped police bust a sex trafficking ring in Naigaon, another part of Mumbai. That operation rescued 2 teenage girls from Bangladesh who were being forced into prostitution. In August 2025, he was involved in another major case where a 12-year-old girl was rescued after being trafficked and exploited by 223 men over 3 months. That case shocked the entire nation. Dr. Varghese has faced threats and intimidation from criminals whose operations he has exposed, but he continues his work because he believes someone needs to stand up for children who cannot protect themselves. The couple who posed as buyers, Mayuri and Laxminarayan Vanam, also took a big risk. If the traffickers had discovered they were working with police, they could have been hurt or even killed. Trafficking networks can be violent, especially when large amounts of money are involved. But Mayuri and her husband felt it was their duty as citizens to help rescue a baby. After the operation was over, they returned to their normal lives in Thane. They did not seek publicity or reward. They just wanted to know that the baby was safe. The police team that conducted the operation worked for weeks to plan everything perfectly. Inspector Dhananjay Shinde had to coordinate between multiple police stations, work with undercover operatives, and time the arrest to catch as many people as possible. Sub-Inspector Jayashree Salunke, one of the few women officers in the unit, played an important role in making sure the baby was handled gently during the arrest. She made sure medical staff checked the infant right away. Assistant Inspector Navnath Kale helped track down Samir after he went into hiding. The senior officers, ADCP Dr. Mahesh Patil and DCP Samir Sheikh, provided the resources and authority needed to make the operation successful. Without their support, the case might not have been solved so quickly. After the arrests, local news media in Mumbai covered the story extensively. Newspapers and television channels reported on the rescue and praised the police for their quick action. Many news reports mentioned Dr. Binu Varghese by name and highlighted his role in the case. Some articles pointed out that this was not the first time he had helped expose a trafficking ring. Social media users in Mumbai and across India shared the news and expressed outrage that parents would sell their own baby. Many people asked how India could prevent such crimes in the future. Some comments called for stricter punishment for traffickers. Others said the government needed to provide more financial support to poor families so they would not feel forced to sell their children. The case also raised questions about the role of hospital staff in trafficking networks. The nurse who was arrested had access to sensitive information about new mothers. She knew which families were struggling financially. She could see birth certificates and medical records. Her position of trust in the hospital allowed her to identify targets for the trafficking ring. This made people wonder how many other hospital workers might be involved in similar crimes. The management of SN Hospital promised to investigate and make sure their staff were following proper ethical guidelines. They said they would increase security and monitoring to prevent patient information from being misused. For the baby at the center of this case, the future was uncertain. Child welfare experts say that infants who are rescued from trafficking face a difficult path ahead. Even though the baby was too young to remember what happened, he would grow up knowing his biological parents tried to sell him. The Child Welfare Committee would have to make hard decisions about his care. They might try to place him with relatives who could provide a loving home, if any such relatives existed and were willing to take him. If no family members came forward, the committee might clear him for legal adoption through the proper channels. This would take time, possibly years. In the meantime, he would live in a government children's home or with a foster family. Social workers would check on him regularly to make sure he was healthy and developing normally. The case against the 7 arrested individuals would take months or even years to wind through India's court system. Each person would have the right to a lawyer and a trial. Prosecutors would need to prove that they knowingly participated in child trafficking. The evidence was strong, Police officers caught Nazreen and Fatima red-handed with the baby and the hospital documents. They had Mayuri and Laxminarayan as witnesses who could testify about the negotiations and the demand for payment. They had phone records showing communication between Samir and the buyers. They had the advance payment that the parents admitted to receiving. With all this evidence, conviction seemed likely. The main defendant, Samir, faced the most serious charges because he organized the whole operation. As a repeat offender, he could receive a longer sentence. Legal experts following the case said the charges under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita and POCSO Act were appropriate. Section 143 of the BNS, which deals with human trafficking, carries a punishment of rigorous imprisonment for a term that can range from 7 years to life in prison. This is a harsh penalty meant to deter people from trafficking. The POCSO Act violations add more years to potential sentences because children are considered especially vulnerable victims under Indian law. Even someone like Fatima, who was 72 years old, could be sent to prison for many years if convicted. Indian courts have been trying to send a strong message that child trafficking will not be tolerated. Beyond the legal consequences for those arrested, the case highlighted the ongoing struggle to combat child trafficking in India. Mumbai, as one of the largest cities in the country, is both a source and a destination for trafficking. Children are brought to Mumbai from rural areas to work as domestic servants, beggars, or in small factories. Babies are bought and sold in the city's slum areas. The police have anti-trafficking units, but they are overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. There are not enough officers trained in trafficking investigations. Many local police stations do not take complaints seriously or do not know how to handle them properly. Corruption is also an issue, with some police officers looking the other way when traffickers pay them bribes. The Mumbai Police Department has tried to improve its response to trafficking in recent years. They have set up special cells focused on crimes against women and children. They provide training on how to interview trafficking victims without traumatizing them further. They work with NGOs and social activists like Dr. Binu Varghese, who have expertise and connections in the community. But resources are limited. Mumbai has millions of people and countless problems competing for police attention, from terrorism threats to organized crime to everyday street crime. Child trafficking can easily fall through the cracks unless someone like Dr. Varghese actively pushes it to the front. The government of Maharashtra, the state where Mumbai is located, has laws and programs meant to prevent child trafficking. There is supposed to be a child welfare committee in every district to handle cases involving children who need care and protection. There are supposed to be anti-trafficking units in every major police district. There are supposed to be shelter homes where rescued children can stay safely. But in practice, many of these systems do not work as well as they should. Committees are understaffed. Shelter homes are overcrowded and underfunded. Police units lack the training and resources they need. As a result, many trafficking cases are never reported, never investigated, or never result in convictions. Non-government organizations play a huge role in filling the gaps. Groups like Rescue Foundation, Purana, and others run their own shelter homes, provide counseling to trafficking victims, and help with legal cases. They do undercover work to identify trafficking networks. They train community members to recognize signs of trafficking and report it. Dr. Binu Varghese works independently but often collaborates with these organizations. Without NGOs and activists, the problem would be far worse than it already is. But these groups are also stretched thin. They rely on donations and grants that can be unpredictable. They cannot be everywhere at once. International organizations have also recognized India's child trafficking problem. UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Agency, works in India to promote child protection and support government efforts. The International Labor Organization focuses on ending child labor, which is often connected to trafficking. The United States government includes India in its annual Trafficking in Persons report, which ranks countries based on their efforts to combat human trafficking. India has been on Tier 2 of that report for many years. Tier 2 means the country does not fully meet minimum standards for eliminating trafficking, but is making significant efforts to do so. To move up to Tier 1, India would need to show more successful prosecutions, better victim protection, and stronger prevention programs. Some experts say the real solution to child trafficking requires addressing the root causes of poverty and inequality. As long as families are so poor that they feel they have no choice but to sell a child, trafficking will continue. India's economy has grown rapidly over the past few decades, but that growth has been unequal. Millions of people still live in extreme poverty, especially in rural areas and urban slums. Access to education is limited for the poorest families. Healthcare is expensive, jobs are scarce, and often pay very little. When a family is struggling to survive day to day, a trafficker offering cash for a baby can seem like a lifeline, even though they know it is wrong. The Indian government has various welfare programs meant to help poor families. There are subsidized food programs that provide rice, wheat, and other basic staples at very low prices. There are programs that give small cash payments to pregnant women and new mothers to help with medical expenses and nutrition. There are programs that provide free education for children and free midday meals at schools to encourage attendance. But these programs do not reach everyone who needs them. In many cases, poor families do not know the programs exist or do not know how to access them. Corruption and bureaucracy can also prevent benefits from reaching the people they are meant to help. Education is another key factor. When parents themselves have little or no education, they may not understand the long-term harm they are causing by selling a child. They may think the baby will have a better life with a wealthy family. They may not realize that the child could end up being abused or exploited by the buyers. Education also gives people more job opportunities, which reduces desperation. Girls who receive education are less likely to be married, young, or trafficked. They have more control over their own lives and can make better decisions for their children. India has made progress in expanding education, but there is still a long way to go, especially in poor and rural areas. Cultural factors also play a role in child trafficking. In some parts of India, having many children is seen as normal or even desirable, even when a family cannot afford to care for them. Sons are often valued more than daughters because sons are expected to support their parents in old age. This can lead to preferential treatment where sons get food and education while daughters do not. It can also lead to trafficking, where parents are more willing to sell a daughter than a son. Changing these cultural attitudes takes time and requires community-level education and awareness programs. The Mumbai case from August 2025 is just one example of a problem that affects thousands of children across India every year. For every baby who is rescued, there are likely many more who are not. Some babies are sold and never found. Others are trafficked across state borders or even international borders, making them nearly impossible to trace. Still others grow up never knowing they were trafficked, believing the people who raised them are their biological parents. The hidden nature of the crime makes it hard to measure the full extent of the problem. Despite all the challenges, cases like the Shivaji Nagar rescue show that progress is possible. When a dedicated activist like Dr. Binu Varghese gets credible information, when he can find citizens willing to help, when he has a police force that takes the case seriously and acts quickly, children can be saved. The 6-day-old baby boy, rescued on August 6, 2025, is alive and safe because all these pieces came together. He will never know how close he came to being lost in the trafficking system. As he grows up, he will hopefully be placed with a family that loves him and gives him the childhood he deserves. The 7 people arrested in this case, meanwhile, faced the consequences of their actions. They were held in police custody while investigators gathered more evidence. Their families might have felt shame or anger or defended them. The community in Shivaji Nagar talked about what happened. Some people knew the accused, and were shocked to learn what they had done. Others were not surprised, saying they always thought something suspicious was going on. The case became a warning to other potential traffickers that they could be caught and punished. For the Mumbai police, this was one successful operation among many cases they handle. But it was an important success. It showed that their anti-trafficking efforts could work when done properly. It gave them confidence to pursue other cases. It strengthened their relationship with activists like Dr. Binu Varghese, who could provide information they would not otherwise have. And it sent a message to the public that the police were serious about protecting children. In the bigger picture, the fight against child trafficking in India continues every single day. There will be more cases, more rescues, more arrests. There will also be children who are not rescued, families who remain desperate, and traffickers who escape justice. But each successful case like the one in Mumbai matters. It saves a life. It breaks up a criminal network. It reminds everyone that children are not commodities to be bought and sold. They are human beings who deserve safety, love, and the chance to grow up free. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 2009 Interpol-led Operation Bia, Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa. The 2009 Interpol-led Operation Bia, Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa. The sun rose over the cocoa plantations of southeastern Côte d'Ivoire on June 18, 2009, as police officers prepared for something that had never been done before in West Africa. Nearly 300 law enforcement officers from the Ivorian police force were getting ready to raid plantations where children were being held as slaves. This was the first time that Interpol, the international police organization, had ever led an operation targeting child trafficking in this part of Africa. The operation had a name. It was called BIA, after the river that runs between Côte d'Ivoire and the neighboring country of Ghana. That river marked the border where children were being trafficked from one country to another to work on farms that grew cocoa beans, the main ingredient in chocolate. For weeks before the raid, planners at Interpol's regional bureau in Abidjan, the largest city in Côte d'Ivoire, had been working with police authorities from both Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire to gather information about which plantations were using illegal child labor. They had received tips from people in local communities. They had collected intelligence from sources who knew where trafficked children were being held. They had studied maps and identified specific farms that should be targeted. The planning took time and careful coordination because they wanted to rescue as many children as possible in one big operation. If they raided just one or two farms, the word would spread quickly, and plantation owners would move the children or hide them. The element of surprise was important. Interpol's involvement in this operation came through a special program called OASIS, which stands for Operational Assistance, Services, and Infrastructure Support to African Police Forces. This program was funded by Germany and was designed to help build stronger police capabilities across Africa. The German government agency, GTZ, which works on development projects around the world, also provided support for Operation BIA. The goal was not just to rescue children, but also to train African police forces so they could continue fighting child trafficking on their own in the future. Interpol brought expertise in investigating human trafficking. They had specialists who knew how to interview child victims without causing them more trauma. They had officers who understood how trafficking networks operated across international borders. The problem of child labor on cocoa farms in West Africa had been known for many years. Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana together produce about 3/4 of all the cocoa in the world. Millions of families depend on cocoa farming for their living, but the work is hard and the pay is low. Many farmers cannot afford to hire adult workers, so they turn to children instead. Some of these children come from the farmers' own families. They work on their parents' or relatives' farms to help make ends meet, but many other children are trafficked from far away. They come from poor countries like Mali and Burkina Faso. They are told they will get good jobs and earn money to send home to their families. Instead, They end up as slaves on plantations, working long hours with no pay and no chance to go to school. The trafficking often happens through a cultural practice that exists in many West African societies. Traditionally, poor families would send their children to live with wealthier relatives in cities or other areas. The idea was that the children would receive an education or learn a trade while helping out with household work. This was seen as a way for communities to support each other. Families who had more resources would take in children from families who had less. Everyone understood that the children were supposed to be treated well, sent to school, and eventually returned to their parents with new skills. But over time, this traditional practice became twisted. Traffickers started taking advantage of it. They would approach poor families and promise to take their children to better opportunities. They would say the children would go to school and learn skills. The parents trusted this because it sounded like the traditional practice they knew. But once the children left with the traffickers, they were sold to plantation owners who needed cheap labor. The promise of education disappeared. Instead of learning in a classroom, children found themselves working from sunrise to sunset in cocoa fields. By June of 2009, Interpol estimated that hundreds of thousands of children were working illegally in the cocoa plantations of Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire alone. The number might have been even higher, but it was impossible to know for sure because so much of the trafficking happened in secret. Many families did not report their missing children to police. Some did not trust the authorities. Others did not even know where to report a crime. The trafficking networks operated quietly, moving children across borders in the middle of the night or hiding them in vehicles during long trips. Once children arrived at plantations deep in rural areas, they became invisible. No one checked on them. No one asked if they were being paid or going to school. They simply worked. The day of the operation finally arrived. On the morning of June 18th, the 8 police teams gathered for their final briefing. 6 of the teams were mobile units that would travel to different plantations to conduct raids. 2 teams were fixed units that would set up checkpoints on main roads leading from Ghana into Côte d'Ivoire. These road checkpoints were important because traffickers were constantly bringing new children across the border. If the mobile teams rescued children from plantations but the fixed teams stopped more children from being trafficked in, the operation would have even greater impact. Each team knew exactly where they were going and what they were looking for. They had photographs and descriptions of some of the suspected traffickers. They had maps showing the locations of plantations. They had lists of questions to ask the children they found. The mobile teams left at different times, so they would arrive at their target locations around the same time. This coordination was crucial. If one team arrived too early and word got out, plantation owners at other locations might hide the children before the other teams arrived. The teams drove through the countryside of southeastern Côte d'Ivoire, past small villages and through forests, heading toward the cocoa-growing regions. Some of the plantations were quite remote, accessible only by rough dirt roads that became muddy during the rainy season. The officers knew they might face resistance from plantation owners who did not want to lose their cheap labor force, but they were ready. When the first team arrived at a plantation, officers spread out quickly to cover all the exits. They did not want anyone to run away or try to hide children in the surrounding forest. They knocked on doors of buildings and walked through the fields calling out. At first, they saw only adult workers, but then they started finding children. Some were working in the cocoa fields, using machetes to cut pods from the trees. Others were in storage buildings, sorting beans. A few were in houses, working as domestic servants. The children looked frightened when they saw the police. Many of them did not understand what was happening. Some tried to run away because they thought they were in trouble. The officers had to speak gently and explain that they were there to help, not to arrest the children. The plantation owners and overseers reacted in different ways. Some claimed the children were relatives who were just helping out on the farm. Others insisted the children were being treated well and were learning valuable skills. A few tried to argue that child labor was normal in this part of Africa and that police had no right to interfere. But the officers had clear orders and legal authority. Child trafficking and forced labor were crimes in Côte d'Ivoire, even if some people wanted to pretend otherwise. The officers arrested 8 people that first day, people who were directly involved in recruiting or exploiting the children. These were not all the guilty parties, of course. There were many more people in the trafficking chain, from the recruiters in Mali and Burkina Faso who first approached families, to the transporters who moved children across borders, to the middlemen who connected children with plantation owners. But arresting 8 people was a start. As the teams worked through June 18th and into June 19th, they rescued more and more children. By the end of the 2-day operation, they had found 54 children living and working on the plantations. These children ranged in age from 11 to 16 years old. They came from 7 different countries, which showed just how far the trafficking networks reached. Most were from Mali and Burkina Faso, 2 very poor countries north of Côte d'Ivoire. But there were also children from other West African nations. Some had been trafficked within Côte d'Ivoire itself, moved from northern regions to southern cocoa-growing areas. The international nature of the problem was now clear. This was not just about one country. It involved multiple nations and crossed many borders. The conditions the children had been living in were terrible. They had been bought by plantation owners who needed cheap labor to harvest cocoa and palm oil. The owners paid traffickers money for the children, usually a few $100s per child, and then treated them as property. The children worked 12 hours a day, every single day. They received no salary for their work. They got food and a place to sleep, but nothing more. They were not allowed to go to school. They had no days off. For the girls, the situation was even worse. They were usually purchased to work as housemaids. They worked 7 days a week all year round, cooking, cleaning, and washing for the plantation owners' families. On top of that, they often had to work in the fields as well during harvest season. The girls got no rest at all. The physical labor was dangerous for children their age. They were forced to carry massive loads that put serious strain on their growing bodies. Cocoa pods are heavy, and once they are harvested, they need to be transported to processing areas. Children would fill large sacks with pods or beans and then carry these sacks through the plantation. Some of the loads weighed more than 100 pounds. For a child of 11 or 12, this was far too much weight. Officers who saw the children noticed that many had health problems. Their backs were bent from carrying heavy loads. Their hands had cuts and scars from using sharp tools. Some children had injuries from falls or accidents while working. Because they never saw doctors, these injuries were never treated properly. They just had to keep working through the pain. When specialist investigators who were trained in child exploitation and trafficking sat down to interview the rescued children, they learned disturbing details. The children described being beaten if they did not work fast enough or if they made mistakes. They talked about being locked in buildings at night so they could not escape. They said they were hungry much of the time because the food they received was not enough for the hard labor they did. They missed their families terribly but had no way to contact them. Many children did not even know exactly where they were. They had been transported to the plantations at night or after long, confusing journeys. They could not have found their way home even if they had managed to escape. One of the most striking discoveries was that none of the children knew that child labor was illegal. They thought this was just how life worked. They believed that poor children like them had to work to survive. Nobody had ever told them they had rights. Nobody had explained that the law said children should be in school, not working on farms. This lack of awareness made them easy targets for traffickers. Even if a child managed to escape from a plantation, they might end up in the same situation somewhere else because they did not know they could report what was happening to authorities. The investigators realized that rescuing children was only part of the solution. They also needed to educate children and communities about their rights so this would not keep happening. The fixed teams at the road checkpoints also had success. They stopped vehicles traveling on the main roads from Ghana into Côte d'Ivoire and checked for children who might be trafficking victims. They found children traveling without proper documentation. They found children who could not explain where they were going or who was supposed to meet them. They found children who showed signs of being coached about what to say to authorities. Whenever the officers suspected that a child was being trafficked, they took the child into protective custody and arrested the adults who were transporting them. This part of the operation was important because it not only rescued children but also disrupted the active flow of new victims into the country. After the operation ended on June 19th, all 54 rescued children were taken into the care of social services and child protection agencies. They could not simply be sent home right away. Many of them had been away from their families for months or even years. Some did not remember exactly where they came from. The authorities needed to identify each child, figure out where they belonged, and make sure it was safe to return them to their families. In some cases, the families themselves had sold the children to traffickers, so sending the children back would put them at risk of being trafficked again. Social workers and child psychologists worked with the children to help them recover from their trauma and plan for their futures. The 8 arrested suspects faced serious criminal charges. Under the laws of Côte d'Ivoire, trafficking children and forcing them to work were major crimes that carried long prison sentences. The prosecutors would need to build cases showing exactly what each suspect had done. This would require testimony from the rescued children, statements from the arresting officers, and documentation of the conditions found on the plantations. The legal process would take months or years to work through the court system, but the arrests sent an important message. For too long, people involved in child trafficking had operated with impunity. They thought they would never face consequences. Operation BIA showed them that times were changing. International organizations and national police forces were now working together to stop child trafficking. The people who exploited children could be caught and punished. The success of Operation BIA was celebrated by Interpol and by organizations working to protect children. This was the first operation of its kind in West Africa, and it proved that coordinated international police work could make a difference. The rescued 54 children represented only a tiny fraction of the total number of children working illegally in West African cocoa plantations. Hundreds of thousands more remained in similar situations. But Operation BIA demonstrated that rescues were possible. It showed that with proper planning, adequate resources, and cooperation between countries, children could be found and freed from slavery. In the days after the operation, news of the rescues spread through West Africa and beyond. International media reported on the story. Human rights organizations praised the police action. Chocolate companies that bought cocoa from West Africa faced renewed pressure to ensure their supply chains were free from child labor. Many of these companies had made promises years earlier to eliminate child trafficking and forced labor from their cocoa sourcing, but progress had been slow. Operation BIA reminded everyone that the problem was still very real and very serious. Children were still suffering on the farms that produced the cocoa used in chocolate bars sold around the world. The government of Côte d'Ivoire expressed commitment to continuing the fight against child trafficking. Officials promised to conduct more operations like BIA in the future. They said they would increase inspections of cocoa plantations and strengthen enforcement of child labor laws. They acknowledged that corruption and lack of resources had allowed trafficking to flourish for too long. Going forward, they would dedicate more police officers and more funding to this issue. They would also work more closely with neighboring countries like Ghana, Mali, and Burkina Faso to stop trafficking at its source and along the routes used to move children. Ghana announced that it would host the next operation in the BIA series. That second operation would focus on the Ghanaian side of the border and would target the fishing industry around Lake Volta, where children were also being exploited. The Ghanaian authorities began planning for this follow-up operation right away. They wanted to build on the momentum created by the first BIA operation. They also wanted to show that Ghana was just as serious about fighting child trafficking as Côte d'Ivoire was. When Operation BIA-2 eventually took place in May of 2011, it would rescue 116 children from forced labor in Ghana's fishing industry. But in June of 2009, all eyes were on the first Operation BIA and the 54 children it had saved. For those children, the rescue marked the beginning of a long and difficult journey toward recovery. They had been through experiences that no child should ever face. They had been separated from their families, deceived by adults they trusted, worked to the point of exhaustion, denied education, and treated as property rather than as human beings. The psychological scars from these experiences would last for years, but at least now they had a chance. They were no longer trapped on isolated plantations with no hope of escape. They were in the care of people who wanted to help them. They could dream about going to school, learning a skill, and building a better life. The traffickers and plantation owners who had been arrested also began a journey, though theirs was toward justice and punishment. They would stand trial for their crimes. If convicted, they would spend years in prison. More importantly, their arrests served as a warning to others who were still exploiting children. The risk of getting caught had just increased. The old days of operating with complete freedom were over. Police forces were now trained to recognize signs of child trafficking. Interpol was coordinating operations across multiple countries. International pressure was mounting on governments to take action. The cost of trafficking children was going up, and the potential consequences were getting more serious. The funding from Germany through the Oasis program proved to be crucial for the success of Operation BIA. Without that financial support, the Ivorian police would not have had the resources to plan and execute such a large-scale operation. Training 300 officers, coordinating 8 teams, providing vehicles and equipment, and caring for 54 rescued children all required money. Many African countries wanted to fight child trafficking, but simply could not afford to. International funding programs like Oasis made it possible for them to take action. The German government and the GTZ organization saw their investment pay off with the successful rescue of children and arrest of traffickers. The officers who participated in Operation BIA returned to their regular duties after the 2-day operation ended, but the experience stayed with them. Many had never worked on a child trafficking case before. Seeing the conditions the children lived in, hearing their stories, and witnessing their relief at being rescued made a deep impression. These officers became advocates within their departments for prioritizing human trafficking investigations. They shared what they learned with colleagues. They pushed their supervisors to dedicate more resources to protecting children. The training they received from Interpol specialists improved their skills and made them more effective at their jobs. In this way, Operation BIA had a ripple effect that extended far beyond the 54 children who were rescued. Interpol's regional bureau in Abidjan played a central role in making Operation BIA happen. This office served all of West Africa, helping police forces in multiple countries work together on cross-border crimes. The staff at the Abidjan Bureau had expertise in human trafficking, organized crime, and international police cooperation. They maintained databases of known traffickers and criminal networks. They facilitated communication between police forces in different countries who might not normally talk to each other. They provided training and technical assistance. Without the regional bureau, a coordinated operation like BIA would have been nearly impossible. The bureau served as the nerve center that brought together all the different pieces. The name Operation BIA carried symbolic meaning beyond just referring to the river. The BIA River itself was more than just a geographic feature marking the border between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. It represented the connections between the two countries, the shared challenges they faced, and the need for cooperation. Children were being trafficked across that river in both directions. Traffickers used the river and the border region as part of their routes. By naming the operation after the river, Interpol highlighted the international nature of the problem and the importance of countries working together to solve it. The river that divided Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire politically needed to become a river that united them in the fight against child trafficking. In the months after Operation BIA, child protection organizations worked to reunite the rescued children with their families. This process involved a lot of investigation and careful planning. Social workers had to locate the families, which sometimes meant traveling to remote villages in Mali or Burkina Faso. They had to assess whether the families would protect the children or whether they might hand them over to traffickers again. In cases where families had knowingly sold their children, social workers had to decide if family reunification was even appropriate. Some children ended up in foster care or group homes instead of returning to their biological families. Others went to vocational training programs where they could learn skills that would help them earn a living when they were older. The goal was to give each child the best possible chance for a good future. Education was a major focus of the recovery programs. All of the rescued children had missed out on years of schooling. Some had never been to school at all. They were far behind their age peers in terms of academic skills. Special programs were designed to help them catch up. Teachers worked with them intensively on basic reading, writing, and math. Gradually, the children began to learn. They discovered that they were capable of understanding books and solving problems. Education opened up new possibilities that they had never imagined while working on plantations. For many of the rescued children, going to school became the most important part of their healing process. It gave them hope and purpose. The chocolate companies that bought cocoa from West Africa faced growing pressure to address child labor in their supply chains. Activists and consumers demanded that companies ensure the chocolate they sold was not made with cocoa harvested by child slaves. Some companies had signed agreements promising to eliminate child labor, but critics said they were not doing enough. Operation BIA added to this pressure by showing the world that child trafficking was still happening on a large scale. Companies could not claim ignorance anymore. The evidence was clear. If they truly wanted to end child labor, they needed to invest more money in monitoring their supply chains, supporting farming communities, and working with governments to enforce laws. Several important lessons emerged from Operation BIA that would guide future operations. First, the importance of intelligence gathering before the operation could not be overstated. The teams knew which plantations to target because they had collected information in advance. Random searches would have been far less effective. Second, coordinating multiple teams to act simultaneously prevented suspects from warning each other and hiding children. Third, having specialized investigators trained in interviewing child trafficking victims made it possible to gather better information without traumatizing the children further. Fourth, setting up fixed checkpoints on roads complemented the plantation raids by catching active trafficking in progress. And fifth, international cooperation through Interpol made resources and expertise available that national police forces could not access on their own. Operation BIA also highlighted ongoing challenges in fighting child trafficking. The operation rescued 54 children, which was wonderful for those 54 individuals and their families. But it barely made a dent in the overall problem. For every child rescued, many more remained in slavery. The trafficking networks were large, sophisticated, and adaptable. When one plantation was raided, others simply became more careful. When one recruiter was arrested, others took their place. Poverty and lack of opportunities in countries like Mali and Burkina Faso continued to make families vulnerable to traffickers' promises. As long as parents were desperate enough to send their children away in hopes of a better life, traffickers would have victims to exploit. Real solutions required addressing poverty, improving education, creating jobs, and changing cultural attitudes. Police operations alone could not solve everything. The media attention that Operation BIA received was a double-edged sword. On one hand, publicity helped raise awareness about child trafficking and child labor in West African cocoa production. People around the world learned about the problem and began demanding change. On the other hand, the media attention made plantation owners more cautious. They knew police might raid them, so they developed strategies to avoid detection. Some moved children to more remote locations. Others coached children on what to say if police came. Some stopped using trafficked children altogether, but replaced them with unpaid family members, which was also illegal, but harder for authorities to prove. The trafficking networks evolved in response to the threat of operations like BIA. 10 years later, 20 years later, the problem of child labor in West African cocoa production still exists. The numbers have changed somewhat. Some progress has been made. More children are going to school than in 2009. More communities are aware of the dangers of trafficking. More companies are monitoring their supply chains. But hundreds of thousands of children still work in cocoa production in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, many of them in dangerous conditions. The structural problems that create child labor, especially poverty and lack of opportunity, have not been fully solved. Operation BIA was an important moment that showed what was possible when police forces worked together across borders. It saved 54 specific children from slavery. It led to additional operations that rescued hundreds more. But the ultimate goal of ending child trafficking and forced child labor in West Africa remains unfulfilled. The legacy of Operation BIA lives on in the ongoing work of Interpol and African police forces to combat human trafficking. The operation demonstrated that international cooperation could yield concrete results. It built capacity within the Ivorian police force and trained officers who would go on to work on many more cases. It created a model that other countries could follow. After BIA came Operation BIA-2 in Ghana, Operation Cascades in Burkina Faso, Operation Bana in Gabon, and others. Each operation rescued children and arrested traffickers. Each operation sent a message that child trafficking would not be tolerated. Taken together, these operations represented a significant international effort to protect children from exploitation. For the 8 people arrested during Operation BI, their involvement in child trafficking would define the rest of their lives. If they were convicted, they would carry criminal records. They would likely spend years in prison. When they got out, they would have trouble finding work. Their families would bear the shame of their crimes. Perhaps some of them felt remorse for what they had done. Perhaps they realized that treating children as slaves was morally wrong. Or perhaps they only regretted getting caught and would go back to trafficking if they had the chance. Either way, their arrests removed 8 people from the trafficking network, at least temporarily. That meant 8 fewer recruiters, transporters, or exploiters in the system. The sunrise on June 18, 2009, marked the beginning of something new in West Africa. For the first time, Interpol was leading a coordinated international police operation focused specifically on rescuing trafficked children. For the first time, officers from Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana were working together with international support to dismantle trafficking networks. For the first time, 54 specific children who had been trapped in slavery on cocoa plantations were freed. Those children, whatever happened to them afterward, would always remember the day the police came. They would remember being told they were going somewhere safe. They would remember driving away from the plantations where they had suffered. That memory, the memory of rescue, would stay with them for the rest of their lives. And for the people who planned and executed Operation BIA, the knowledge that they had saved those children would stay with them too. In a world where terrible things happen to vulnerable people every day, they had done something good. They had made a difference. That mattered. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.